You spent years earning this moment. Someone else spent 5 minutes destroying it with a complaint about the font on the program. 71 real complaints. 71 ruined days. Let's go. 1. The most universally celebrated sound at a graduation ceremony, the cheer that erupts when your kid's name gets called, is apparently a crime in certain zip codes, and someone filed the paperwork to prove it. A vocal Karen at ceremonies across the country has decided that whooping, hollering, and screaming your child's name from the bleachers is vulgar, low class, and a personal assault on the solemnity of the occasion. Here is what she's not telling you. Loud, joyful public celebration at graduation is not only historically normal, it is the entire biological and social point of holding a ceremony in public in the first place. Public graduation ceremonies in the United States evolved from medieval European university traditions called commencement, which were communal and loud affairs involving crowds, bells, and public proclamations, not hushed auditoriums where people dabbed their eyes in silence. Cheering when a graduate's name is called has been documented practice at virtually every American public high school graduation since at least the 1950s. It is considered culturally normative by sociologists who study rite of passage ceremonies. A viral incident in Georgia in 2019 made national news when a mother was arrested after being repeatedly warned not to cheer for her graduating child, a policy driven entirely by complaint pressure. And that story sparked a national debate about whether we had completely lost the plot. Psychologists who study milestone events note that public vocalization of pride releases oxytocin in both the celebrant and the observer, cementing the social significance of the moment for everyone in the room. And the argument that cheering drowns out other names? The average gap between announcements at a standard graduation is 8 to 12 seconds, longer than any individual cheer lasts. Banning cheering at graduation because it's too loud is like banning applause at a concert because the musician already knows they played well. The noise was never for them, it was for you. And you earned the right to make it. 2. Somewhere in the weeks before graduation, a Karen submitted a formal written complaint to the principal demanding that the name-calling order be strictly alphabetical with 0 exceptions. Because any deviation is, in her words, unfair, chaotic, and disrespectful to the process. This woman has confused a community ceremony with a government filing system, and the confusion is doing real damage. The alphabetical ordering of graduates is a logistical tool, full stop. It was adopted by American schools in the early 20th century, primarily to manage large crowds and simplify diploma distribution. It was never intended as a merit-based system, a civil right, or a framework so sacred that a wheelchair-using classmate cannot be moved 2 spots forward to safely access the stage. That is the real-world version of this complaint. A parent who filed a formal objection with a school board because a student with mobility needs was repositioned in the lineup, and the objection was dismissed unanimously. Schools legally retain full administrative discretion over ceremony logistics, including name order, as confirmed by the National School Boards Association, provided adjustments do not discriminate on the basis of protected characteristics. Alphabetical order was never globally adopted as a universal standard. Many international graduation ceremonies order graduates by academic rank, department, or randomized lottery. And here's the part that should sting a little. The perceived fairness of alphabetical order actually disadvantages the same students every single year. If your surname starts with a letter near the end of the alphabet, you have spent your entire academic career being called last, seated last, and handed things last. A documented source of mild but real social inequity studied in educational psychology. Filing a formal complaint because graduation didn't go A to Z is the administrative equivalent of demanding a restaurant serve the table in order of reservation number down to the minute. The meal is the same. The diploma does not know what time it was handed out. 3. Before the ceremony even started, A Karen was already flagging down a school administrator in the lobby, pointing with genuine fury at a graduate whose mortarboard had flowers on it. Hand-painted designs, a small flag. Something personal and human on a piece of cardboard that had traveled through 4 years of that student's life. She wanted it removed immediately. "Nobody else has one," she said, as though conformity were a graduation requirement listed in the school handbook. It is not. Mortarboard decoration is a widely accepted, legally complicated to ban, and emotionally significant tradition in American schools. And craft supply retailers dedicate entire seasonal sections to graduation, cap decoration materials because the tradition is that mainstream. In 2021, the ACLU filed legal arguments supporting students' rights to display cultural and personal expression on their caps after several Indigenous students were threatened with removal from ceremonies for displaying tribal beadwork and traditional symbols that represented their families, their heritage, and everything that got them to that stage. A federal court in Texas ruled in favor of a student displaying a small national flag on her cap, finding that the school's interest in visual uniformity did not outweigh her expressive rights at a public, non-instructional ceremony. Multiple universities, including several Ivy League institutions, dropped blanket cap decoration bans after facing legal scrutiny and replaced them with size and safety guidelines instead. The argument that a decorated cap is distracting has been studied in the context of large graduation audiences. With hundreds of graduates crossing a stage, the visual impact of a single decorated cap on overall comprehension is functionally zero. Historically, the mortarboard itself came from European clerical tradition, and European academics routinely decorated academic regalia with ribbons, pins, and insignia to denote rank and achievement. Demanding a graduate remove flowers from their cap because it breaks. Visual uniformity is like demanding a marathon finisher remove their race bib because everyone else's number is also a number. The achievement is theirs. The hat is just the packaging. 4. The valedictorian finished the third sentence of her address. She mentioned climate change. A Karen was already moving toward the aisle. By the time the speech was over, the principal had been approached, a complaint had been lodged, and the demand was simple: keep politics out of graduation. Here's what the Karen does not understand, and what no amount of righteous hallway confrontation will change. Valedictorian speeches at public school graduations are legally protected student speech under the First Amendment, and schools that attempt to censor them based on viewpoint lose in court. The landmark Supreme Court case, Tinker v. Des Moines, decided in 1969, established that students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate, and subsequent rulings have extended meaningful speech protections to student-selected commencement speakers. A 2023 case in a Texas school district drew national attention when administrators cut a valedictorian's microphone mid-speech after she referenced reproductive rights. The district faced legal action and a public relations disaster of its own making. The valedictorian tradition in American schools began in the 19th century as an exercise specifically designed to showcase students' ability to engage with the major civic and intellectual issues of their time. It was always meant to be substantive. Legal scholars note a critical distinction that the hallway complainer never makes. Schools may regulate the form of speech, time, place, manner, but may not regulate content based on viewpoint, meaning a blanket no politics rule is itself an unconstitutional viewpoint-based restriction. Surveys of valedictorian speeches from 1990 to 2020 show that references to social issues appear in the majority of top-ranked student addresses. Many of the most celebrated graduation speeches in American history were explicitly political and are now taught in rhetoric courses as models of effective public address. Telling an 18-year-old valedictorian to keep politics out of her 3-minute speech about the world she just inherited is like handing someone a diploma and then asking them not to use it to think. 5. She stepped out to take a phone call. It happens. What does not happen, what cannot happen, what will never happen, is the thing she demanded when she came back and found she had missed her son walking across the stage. She wanted the vice principal to call his name again, re-walk him across. Or, and this is where it escalated, hold the entire ceremony while she figured out how to retrieve the moment she had chosen to miss. A graduation ceremony is a live, linear, one-time public event. It is not a streaming service with a rewind function. No administrator on the planet has the authority or the obligation to halt several hundred people's milestone moment because one parent prioritized a different conversation. Large public high school graduation ceremonies typically involve between 200 and 600 graduates, with each name announcement consuming approximately 10 to 15 seconds of ceremony time. Recalling a single name disrupts the logistical flow for every graduate who has not yet walked. Many schools now provide professional video recording of the full ceremony, available for free download specifically to address the situation. The technology solution to a human attention problem has existed for over 2 decades. The legal and administrative authority of a graduation MC or principal does not include the power to reverse ceremony proceedings based on individual parent requests, a fact documented in most school district event planning manuals. Sociologists who study public ritual note that the integrity of a communal ceremony depends on its forward momentum. Interruptions for individual do-overs fundamentally alter the social experience for every other participant. Some schools have responded to repeat complaints by implementing a photo pause after each graduate crosses the stage, only to immediately receive new complaints from other parents that the ceremony is running too long. Demanding a graduation ceremony pause and rewind because you stepped out is the same as calling a referee to replay the championship goal because you were in the concession line. The game does not wait for the nachos. 6. The email arrived 3 paragraphs long. The subject line read, "Gown color concern. Urgent." The graduating class had voted democratically on a gown color that did not match the school's official palette, and the Karen had decided this was an embarrassment to tradition and a slap in the face to alumni. She wanted the school board to know. What she did not know, and what nobody had apparently told her before she hit send, is that graduation gown colors in American high schools are selected through a process that has exactly zero connection to any binding historical, academic, or cultural standard. There is no tradition to violate. Academic regalia color standards in the United States apply at the university level and are governed by the American Council on Education's Intercollegiate Code, which covers hood trim colors to denote fields of study. None of these standards apply to high school graduation attire. High school graduation gown colors are driven almost entirely by vendor inventory, cost, and school preference, and many schools have changed colors multiple times within a single generation. The history of American academic regalia was only loosely standardized as recently as 1895, when a conference of university representatives attempted to create a national code. And even that code was largely ignored by many institutions. School colors as a concept emerged in American athletics culture in the late 1800s and were never formally tied to academic regalia requirements. The two traditions developed in parallel and independently. Alumni who graduated decades earlier almost certainly wore different gown styles, colors, and cuts than current students, making any appeal to unbroken tradition factually inaccurate by the standards of the school's own history. Student body votes on gown color are a documented democratic tradition at hundreds of schools. Complaining that graduation gowns are the wrong shade of blue is like staging a protest because the building you got married in repainted its lobby. The ceremony happened. The color of the fabric was never the point. 7. The announcement came out. Graduation would be held on the football field this year. The Karen filed a formal grievance within 48 hours. The word she kept using was unprofessional, then disrespectful. Then the one that really showed her hand. Not a real graduation. She wanted a building. She wanted an indoor arena. She wanted whatever she had built up in her imagination as the correct container for this moment. Here is the thing she missed entirely. Outdoor graduation ceremonies are not a compromise or a downgrade. They are a deeply established American tradition with a longer documented history than indoor arena ceremonies. For the first half of the 20th century, the vast majority of American high school graduations were held outside. The shift to large indoor venues was driven by urban school size growth in the mid to late 20th century and reflects logistical necessity, not a cultural elevation in ceremony quality. Multiple studies on graduation satisfaction have found that families in regions with mild climates consistently rate outdoor ceremonies higher than indoor arena ceremonies, citing better sightlines, more space, and a less sterile atmosphere. Outdoor ceremonies allow more attendees per graduate, a significant equity issue because indoor venue seating is frequently rationed by ticket limits that fire codes enforce. The most photographed, most watched, and most culturally significant graduation ceremonies in American life, including those at Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, are held outdoors and have been for over a century. Weather contingency planning for outdoor ceremonies is standard administrative practice, and most schools that hold outdoor graduations have documented backup protocols communicated to families in advance. Insisting graduation must be indoors to count as legitimate is like insisting a wedding isn't real unless it's held in a specific type of building. The diploma at the end of the walk doesn't know if the sky was visible. Neither does anyone else who mattered that day. 8. The superintendent received a call. The school, apparently, had made a catastrophic error. It had allowed a second student, the class president, to speak at graduation alongside the valedictorian. The Karen wanted this corrected. Only the valedictorian earned the right to speak, she said. Allowing another student to address the class cheapens the honor. She said this with confidence. She was wrong with confidence. The idea that a single student holds an exclusive monopoly on graduation speaking rights is a cultural assumption with no legal, academic, or administrative backing whatsoever. Historically, commencement ceremonies featured multiple student orations as their central educational showcase. The valedictorian was one of several speakers, not the only one. In the 19th century, it was common for 6 to 12 students to deliver addresses at graduation, with the valedictorian delivering the final farewell. The National Association of Secondary School Principals has explicitly encouraged schools to expand graduation speaking opportunities beyond the single valedictorian model, citing research that broader student representation improves ceremony engagement and family satisfaction. Many schools now use a faculty and student panel to select graduation speakers through an application process, specifically because the GPA-based valedictorian system has been criticized for over-representing students from affluent backgrounds who have access to grade-boosting resources. The presence of multiple speakers does not meaningfully lengthen graduation ceremonies. A second student speech adds 5 to 8 minutes to an event already running 90 to 120 minutes. And legally, decisions about who speaks at a school graduation ceremony are administrative determinations made by school officials, not rights or entitlements, subject to parental veto. Demanding only the valedictorian speak is like insisting only the MVP can give a post-game interview. The team still won together. The microphone doesn't diminish the trophy, it just means more people got to hold it. 9. Somewhere between the processional and the diploma walk, a graduate did a small dance move crossing the stage. Maybe a fist pump, maybe a brief hug of the principal, maybe just a visible, human, joyful expression of what it felt like to have finally made it. The Karen, seated near the aisle, was audibly displeased. She said immature. She said undignified. She said ruining the ceremony. She found a staff member to tell, "Let's be clear about what actually exists to govern how a graduate crosses a graduation stage." Because the answer is nothing. There is no governing body, no legal standard, and no historical precedent that defines appropriate stage-crossing behavior at a high school graduation. Celebratory gestures at graduation stage crossings, including dances, jumps, fist pumps, and embraces, have been documented in American school graduation coverage since at least the 1970s and have never been subject to any formal regulatory standard. Multiple viral graduation moments that generated overwhelmingly positive national media coverage involved graduates doing unexpected, joyful, or humorous things on stage, including breakdancing and performing magic tricks. And public sentiment was not outraged, it was delighted. The concept of graduation ceremony dignity is entirely culturally constructed and has no objective definition. What reads as dignified in one community may read as cold and exclusionary in another. Anthropologists who study rite of passage ceremonies note that physical expression of triumph is a universal human response to the completion of a major challenge, appearing across virtually every documented culture's milestone celebrations. Schools that implemented explicit no celebration, stage crossing policies uniformly face backlash, social media criticism, and in several cases, organized student protests during the ceremony itself. Research on student engagement in milestone ceremonies shows that personal agency, the ability to express yourself authentically at the moment of recognition, is directly correlated with how meaningfully students remember that event decades later. Policing how a graduate crosses the stage is like telling someone they can't smile in their driver's license photo because the DMV prefers neutral. The license is still valid. Let them dance. 10. The graduation programs had been printed, distributed, and were already in the hands of attendees filing into their seats when the Karen noticed it. Several students were listed under preferred names, names that differed from their official enrollment records. She wanted the program reprinted. She contacted the district's communications office. She used the word error several times in a way that made clear she did not consider this negotiable. Here's what the program actually is, legally and administratively: a ceremonial document, not a legal instrument, not an official record, a program. Preferred name policies in American K-12 education have expanded significantly since the mid-2010s, with a majority of large urban and suburban school districts adopting formal procedures allowing students to use names other than their legal names on non-legal school materials. The graduation program is universally classified as a ceremonial, non-legal document by school legal counsel. It has no bearing on diploma validity, transcript accuracy, or any official record. The National Education Association and the American School Counselor Association have both published guidelines encouraging schools to use students' preferred names in all non-legal contexts, citing research linking name recognition to student belonging and psychological safety. Reprinting a graduation program for a school of 300 or more students costs thousands of dollars and requires days of production time, a cost borne by general school funds in response to a single complaint. Legal name change is a separate administrative process handled through courts. A graduation program has never been a mechanism for or against legal name recognition, and multiple court cases have explicitly clarified that schools are not required to use only legal names on ceremonial materials. Demanding a graduation program be reprinted because a student goes by a different name is like demanding a birthday cake be remade because it says Mike instead of Michael Francis. The cake is still for the same person. The candles still count. 11. The venue had a scheduling conflict. The school moved graduation back 1 week. A Karen organized a parent petition, presented it at a school board meeting, and described the reschedule as a betrayal of the seniors. She had that word ready. Betrayal. For a calendar adjustment driven by a venue availability issue that affected every family in exactly the same way simultaneously. Graduation dates are administrative projections set months in advance under conditions that can and do change. Venue availability, weather emergencies, public health conditions, and facility problems are all documented, legitimate grounds for rescheduling. The COVID-19 pandemic forced the rescheduling, cancellation, or restructuring of an estimated 35,000 graduation ceremonies across the United States in 2020 alone. And the class of 2020 is by every measure still considered to have fully graduated. Venue contracts for graduation ceremonies routinely include force majeure and administrative flexibility clauses, precisely because large-scale events are subject to circumstances beyond school control. School boards retain full legal authority over the scheduling of school events. No parent body, petition, or individual complaint carries legal weight sufficient to override a scheduling decision made for documented logistical reasons. A 1-week schedule change is categorically different from a cancellation. Graduates still walk, diplomas are still awarded, the ceremony still happens. The social and logistical impact of a 1-week change, while genuinely inconvenient, is not the school's legal responsibility to prevent entirely. Travel arrangements and personal schedules are personal challenges, not institutional obligations. Historical records show that graduation ceremonies have been rescheduled due to weather alone hundreds of thousands of times across American school history, with no documented long-term impact on graduate satisfaction or ceremony meaning. Treating a one-week graduation reschedule as a betrayal is like calling a restaurant because they moved your reservation by 7 days. The table is still yours, the meal is still coming, adjust the carpool. 12. She arrived 45 minutes after doors opened, brought 11 people with her, found the lower section full, and then demanded that school staff physically relocate other families who had arrived early so her group could sit together. She was not asking exactly. The entitlement had a specific texture, the kind that has never been told no in a meaningful way and does not plan to start hearing it now. Open, unreserved seating at graduation ceremonies operates on the same social contract as every other first-come, first-seated public event in the history of organized human gatherings. School staff at graduation events have no legal authority to forcibly relocate seated guests who arrived within the permitted entry window and claim seats legitimately. Doing so would expose the school to liability. The logistical reality of a large ceremony means that a group of 11 expecting prime seating while arriving after the venue is 80% full is a planning failure, not a venue failure. Many schools have specifically moved to ticketed assigned seating systems in recent years precisely because of the volume of this exact type of seating dispute, which administrators documented as consistently disruptive to pre-ceremony operations. Venue staff at graduation ceremonies report that seating disputes are among the top 3 pre-ceremony disruptions they manage, and that in nearly every documented case the complaining family arrived significantly later than the families whose seats are being contested. The social contract of arrive early for better seats at a general admission event is one of the most universal and oldest norms in public event culture. It existed before graduation ceremonies existed, and it will exist after. Demanding better seats after arriving late to an open seating event is like showing up to a sold-out movie in the third act and asking the theater to rewind it for you. The film doesn't care. Neither does the folding chair you passed on the way in. 13. A student speaker briefly referenced her faith in her graduation address, thanked a higher power, mentioned what her beliefs meant to her journey, and before the ceremony was over, a Karen was threatening legal action. Church-state violation, constitutional breach. She had the language ready, and she deployed it with real conviction. She was also wrong in a way that legal scholars specifically flag as one of the most commonly held misconceptions about First Amendment law. Student-initiated, student-authored references to personal faith in a graduation speech are constitutionally protected private speech, and they are legally distinct from school-sponsored religious content, a distinction courts have drawn clearly and repeatedly. The Supreme Court case, Santa Fe Independent School District v. Doe, decided in 2000, addressed school-sponsored prayer at school events but explicitly did not ban student-initiated private religious expression in student speeches selected through neutral criteria. The legal standard established across multiple federal circuit courts distinguishes between a school directing religious content, which is unconstitutional, and a student independently choosing to reference their faith in a personal address, which is protected speech. The Department of Education's guidance on prayer and religious expression in public schools, updated in 2020, explicitly states that students may express their beliefs about religion in assignments and public addresses, provided the school does not organize or direct the religious content. The inverse scenario, schools actively suppressing student religious speech in personal addresses, has itself been successfully litigated as a violation of students' First Amendment rights in multiple federal cases. The social pressure created by these complaints has documented chilling effects. Students have self-censored authentic personal narratives out of fear, producing less meaningful addresses that receive lower satisfaction ratings from audiences. Threatening to sue over a student thanking her faith in a personal speech is like threatening to sue a thank you card because it mentions God. The card was personal. The microphone belonged to the student for those 3 minutes. 14. The Parent Advisory Committee had a Karen on it. A student who had spent years in the school community, who was recognized, loved, and missed, was absent from the graduation program, not by oversight, by her design. The The student had participated in a virtual ceremony accommodation due to a documented medical condition, and the Karen had pushed to have that student excluded from the program entirely, name removed from the printed list, participation erased. She framed it as fairness. It was the opposite. Graduation participation accommodations for students with documented barriers are a legal, administrative, and moral obligation of public schools, not an optional courtesy that parent committees get to vote on. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act require public schools to make reasonable accommodations for students with disabilities in all school activities, including graduation ceremonies. Students who are hospitalized, dealing with serious illness, or otherwise unable to physically attend graduation have been legally and administratively accommodated through alternate diploma presentations for decades. This is standard practice, not an innovation. A student's physical absence from the stage does not affect the legal validity of their diploma, their academic record, or any aspect of their achievement. These are entirely independent of ceremony participation. Advocating for the removal of a student's name from graduation materials because of an accommodation need meets the legal definition of disability-based discrimination when the student has a qualifying condition. And schools that have capitulated to this pressure have faced successful complaints to the Office for Civil Rights and documented legal settlements. Demanding a student be erased from graduation because they couldn't walk across the stage is like demanding a runner's medal be taken back because they finished the race in a different lane. The distance was the same, the effort was real. The finish line does not require witnesses. 15, the class voted. They wanted a different processional, a modern orchestral arrangement, something that actually meant something to them, something that reflected the 4 years they had just survived together. The band director received a hand-signed petition to the contrary within days. It demanded the restoration of Elgar's pomp and circumstance. The petition cited tradition, it cited alumni, it cited the sanctity of the ceremony. What it did not cite, because the person who organized it did not know, is that pomp and circumstance did not become the standard American graduation processional until the early 20th century, adopted without any governing mandate through cultural momentum and band director habit. Edward Elgar composed the piece in 1901 in England, where it was associated with British imperial ceremonialism and had nothing to do with academic graduation. It was first used at an American graduation ceremony at Yale University in 1905. A choice made by one music director at one institution, not a national standard established by any governing educational body. The American School Band Directors Association has no official policy mandating any specific graduation processional music and explicitly encourages schools to select music that reflects their student community. Numerous American universities, including several with centuries of academic tradition, use entirely different processionals, including original compositions and culturally specific music, with no controversy and no loss of ceremony legitimacy. A class vote to select graduation music is a documented democratic exercise in student governance. Overriding it in response to a single adult's cultural preference is a direct contradiction of the school's own student voice policies. Demanding pomp and circumstance at every graduation forever is like demanding every wedding use the same march, because that's what your parents played. The ritual is real, the song is just the song. This class had their own. 16, graduation ended. The Karen was waiting. She had notes. The student-produced video montage had, in her assessment, wasted time. It was not, in her view, part of a real graduation. The art installation in the lobby by the senior studio class, a distraction. The musical performance by students who had spent 4 years in that program, not necessary. She wanted the principal to know. Here's what she apparently did not know. Student creative contributions to graduation ceremonies are an educationally documented, widely celebrated practice that extends the ceremony's meaning beyond a name-calling exercise and reflects the actual full breadth of what students accomplished. The National Art Education Association and the National Association for Music Education both cite graduation performances and installations as high-visibility culminating events that validates students' creative academic work in front of their full community. Research on graduation ceremony satisfaction consistently finds that personalized student-created content significantly increases family engagement and emotional investment compared to purely administrative name-calling formats. The average graduation ceremony name-calling segment runs between 45 and 90 minutes, a time frame during which families seated far from the stage report high rates of disengagement and lost attention. Schools in performing arts, visual arts, and technical programs have documented decades of ceremonies that incorporate student work as a central feature, often to wide acclaim. The video montage in question typically runs 3 to 5 minutes, a statistically negligible addition to a ceremony already spanning well over an hour. International graduation ceremonies at secondary schools in South Korea, Japan, and several European nations routinely feature extensive student performances as the centerpiece of the event, with no reduction in perceived ceremony legitimacy. Complaining that student art wasted time at graduation is like complaining that the photos at a wedding wasted film. The point was never just to get through the paperwork, the point was to mark what happened. 17, she submitted a written objection to the school board. The graduation had featured recognition for community service hours, athletic achievement, and artistic excellence, and she wanted it on record that she found this inappropriate. Only GPA-based academic honors belonged at a graduation ceremony, she argued. Everything else was noise that diluted the achievement of students who had worked for their grades. What she was actually arguing, though she would not have put it this way, is that 12 years of a student's life can be meaningfully captured by a single number, and that any human achievement that number doesn't measure isn't worth a stage moment. That argument is contradicted by every major framework in contemporary education research. The U.S. Department of Education's framework for whole child education explicitly identifies social emotional development, civic engagement, arts, and physical development as equal pillars of a complete education alongside academic achievement. Community service recognition at graduation has been a documented practice in American schools since at least the 1960s, expanding significantly after the National and Community Service Trust Act of 1993 formalized service learning as a component of American secondary education. Research on long-term graduate outcomes consistently shows that non-GPA factors, leadership experience, community engagement, creative achievement, are stronger predictors of life satisfaction and career success than GPA alone for the majority of graduates. Athletic, artistic, and civic achievements in high school represent hundreds of hours of dedicated effort, often exceeding the time investment of maintaining a high GPA, making their exclusion from recognition an arbitrary distinction that benefits no one. Multiple legal frameworks governing public education explicitly prohibit schools from communicating that students who do not achieve high academic marks are less valued members of their community. Insisting graduation only recognize grades is like insisting a town's annual celebration only honor the tallest buildings. The community was built by more than one kind of effort. 18, before the ceremony even started, she had already found him, the student who was going to walk, despite having an incomplete credit finishing in July. She wanted the principal to take the diploma back at the ceremony, publicly in front of the gathered families, as a lesson in consequences. She had framed this in her own mind as accountability. Public exclusion of students from graduation ceremonies as a punitive spectacle serves no documented educational purpose, creates significant legal exposure, and causes harm that school counselors flag as real and lasting. The American Psychological Association's guidelines on student discipline explicitly categorize public shaming in front of peers as a harmful disciplinary practice with no evidence of positive behavioral outcomes. Most state education codes allow students to walk at graduation while completing remaining credits through approved recovery programs. Wholesale exclusion is the exception, not the rule, and is rarely mandated. The argument that public exclusion deters future academic underperformance is not supported by any peer-reviewed research on graduation participation and subsequent outcomes. Students with disabilities who may have academic gaps due to their disability face significant legal protection under IDEA and Section 504 that categorical exclusion policies routinely violate. The social and emotional consequences of being visibly excluded from a peer milestone ceremony, watching your class graduate from the audience, are documented in clinical literature as risk factors for anxiety, depression, and disengagement in the transition year that follows. Every high-profile attempt to publicly bar individual students from graduation ceremonies has resulted in legal challenges, media coverage, and ultimately the student being allowed to participate, making the policy both harmful and practically unenforceable in every documented case. Using public graduation exclusion as a deterrent is like posting a list of failed driving tests on a town billboard to encourage better preparation. It doesn't teach, it just humiliates. And the billboard stays up long after anyone intended. 19, the moment she realized graduation fell on a date that conflicted with her family's religious observance, the demand was immediate and total. Reschedule the entire ceremony for the whole class, not an individual accommodation, not an alternate diploma presentation. A full reschedule of an event involving hundreds of families, a signed venue contract, and months of administrative coordination. Because her calendar had a conflict, the legal obligation schools hold regarding religious accommodation is to provide reasonable individual accommodations for affected students, not to redesign the entire ceremony calendar around the observance schedules of any single religion or family. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and its educational equivalents require schools to make reasonable religious accommodations for individual students, and the legal standard for reasonable accommodation in educational contexts has been tested in multiple federal cases and consistently defined as providing the individual student with an alternative diploma presentation or equivalent recognition, not a full ceremony reschedule. Graduation ceremony dates are set months to years in advance based on venue availability, academic calendar constraints, district policy, and coordination with other schools, making a reschedule request practically and contractually impossible regardless of its merits. Schools in religiously diverse urban areas with large observant populations manage graduation date conflicts regularly through individual accommodation protocols that have been legally tested and refined over decades. The social math of rescheduling is worth sitting with. If a school of 400 graduates were to reschedule around the observance conflicts of every represented religious community, the ceremony would need to avoid roughly 40 to 60% of calendar dates in some urban districts, leaving no viable window at all. The difference between my child cannot attend on this date and this date must change for everyone is the legal and moral distinction that defines an unreasonable demand. Demanding the whole graduation move because it conflicts with your calendar is like demanding a city reschedule its July 4th fireworks because you have plans. Your observance is real. The ceremony is also real. One of them has 400 other families attached to it. 20, a Karen circulated a message through the class parent group chat establishing a specific dollar amount that every family was required to contribute to the class gift fund. Required. She had set the deadline. She had the spreadsheet. When families did not contribute by her personal cutoff, she named them. Not directly, but in the specific way that makes everyone in the thread understand exactly who she means. Parent-organized class gift collections for graduation are entirely voluntary, entirely informal, and legally unaffiliated with the school in any way that would give any parent enforcement authority over any other parent. Class gift collections are not school-sponsored activities in the vast majority of American school districts. They are informal parent initiatives with no institutional backing, no legal standing, and no mechanism for enforcement whatsoever. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act and related state laws prohibit schools from facilitating or endorsing financial solicitations directed at families without explicit district approval, meaning the school cannot and does not sanction unofficial gift mandates constructed in a group chat. Publicly identifying families who decline to participate in a voluntary financial collection creates a documented hostile social environment. School counselors and administrators categorize this behavior as social coercion and have intervened in documented cases where the pressure campaign escalated. The income diversity within any typical graduating class means that a fixed, appropriate contribution amount is inherently inequitable. Families facing economic hardship are disproportionately harmed by social pressure campaigns tied to a single dollar figure. Gift collection for teachers and school communities is a voluntary cultural practice whose social value depends entirely on it being genuinely voluntary. The moment enforcement pressure is applied, the practice becomes coercive regardless of the original intent. Publicly shaming families who skip the class gift fund is like the neighborhood watch chair fining people who don't bring a dish to the optional potluck. The event is voluntary. Your spreadsheet is not a law. 21. She stood at the school board meeting and made the case with real conviction. Students who fail to fully meet academic requirements should be visibly, publicly barred from the graduation stage as a deterrent and a lesson in consequences. She called it accountability. She wanted it on record. What she was actually proposing, and what no one in that room should have needed to explain to her, is a public shaming event with no documented educational benefit and significant documented harm. The American Psychological Association's guidelines on student discipline explicitly categorize public shaming in front of peers as a harmful disciplinary practice with no evidence of positive behavioral outcomes and significant evidence of negative psychological effects on the students targeted. Most state education codes allow students to participate in graduation ceremonies while completing remaining credit requirements through approved recovery programs. Wholesale exclusion is the exception, not the rule, and is rarely mandated even when remaining requirements exist. The argument that public exclusion deters academic underperformance in future students is not supported by any peer-reviewed research on graduation participation and subsequent academic outcomes. It is an intuition dressed up as a policy position. Legal scholars have noted that categorical exclusion from graduation ceremonies for students with disabilities who may have academic gaps due to their disability raises significant legal exposure under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and Section 504. The social and emotional consequences of being visibly excluded from a peer milestone ceremony are documented in clinical literature as risk factors for anxiety, depression, and school disengagement in the transition year. Every high-profile case in which a school attempted to publicly bar an individual student from graduation resulted in legal challenges, media coverage, and ultimately the student participating, making the policy both harmful and practically unenforceable in every documented instance. Using public graduation exclusion as a deterrent is like posting a list of failed tests on a town billboard to inspire better performance. It doesn't teach. It just humiliates. 22. She stormed out of the graduation ceremony lobby mid-program and found an administrator to confront. The offense, printed programs and stage announcements, included translations in Spanish and Vietnamese for a student body whose families spoke those languages. She called it disrespectful to English-speaking families. She wanted the translations removed. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act requires that schools take reasonable steps to ensure meaningful communication with families who have limited English proficiency, and graduation programs and announcements are explicitly included in federal guidance on this requirement. The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights has issued guidance specifying that failing to provide translated materials at major school events for families with limited English proficiency may constitute a discriminatory barrier to equal participation, meaning the translations are not a courtesy, they are a compliance measure. Including a translated column in a graduation program does not remove or diminish the English content in any way. It is additive, not substitutive, meaning English-speaking families lose nothing while non-English-speaking families gain meaningful access to a ceremony involving their own child. Research on family engagement in school communities shows that families who receive school communications in their home language demonstrate significantly higher rates of attendance at school events, including graduation. The translation is working as intended. The United States has no official national language. English is the dominant language of public discourse, but is not legally designated as the exclusive language of public school communications, a point that has been litigated and upheld in federal courts. Many of the schools with the highest graduation rates and strongest family engagement in the country are in multilingual communities where intentional translation of school communications is a core administrative practice. Objecting to a Spanish column in the graduation program is like objecting to the Braille menu at a restaurant because you can already read the regular one. The page has room, the ceremony has room, so does the room. 23, the complaint landed the morning after graduation with a timestamp that suggested she had composed it the previous night. Subject, ceremony duration, unacceptable. The graduation had run 2 hours and 20 minutes, and she wanted accountability for what she described as a disaster of planning. Let's do the math she did not do before she hit send. At a pace of approximately 10 seconds per graduate name announcement, accounting for walking time, handshake, photo, pause, and movement off stage, a class of 300 graduates consumes approximately 50 minutes of ceremony time for the diploma walk alone. When you add a processional of 10 to 15 minutes, 2 to 3 speeches running 15 to 25 minutes, musical performances or presentations of 5 to 15 minutes, opening and closing remarks of 5 to 10 minutes, and a recessional of 10 minutes. A minimum ceremony for 300 graduates runs approximately 95 to 120 minutes under ideal conditions. 2 hours and 20 minutes is not a planning failure. It is arithmetic. Post-ceremony surveys consistently show that families' satisfaction with graduation is correlated with feeling that their graduate received appropriate individual recognition, and that satisfaction drops sharply when name-calling is rushed, names are mispronounced, or graduates are hurried across the stage. The suggestion that ceremonies should be shortened typically generates proposals like fewer speeches, eliminated music, and rushed name-calling, all of which are independently complained about by other families in the same survey data. Graduation ceremonies at major universities, which are publicly celebrated and widely attended, routinely run 3 to 4 hours and are broadly reported as meaningful rather than excessive. Research on event perception shows that the subjective experience of duration is strongly influenced by engagement level. People who feel connected to what they are watching consistently report the same objective duration as feeling shorter than people who feel disconnected. Complaining that graduation ran too long because there were too many graduates is like complaining that the birthday party had too many candles. They were all supposed to be there. 24, she arrived late to graduation, found the lower section substantially full, and identified the family of a student her daughter had a conflict with, seated 2 rows from where she wanted to be. She found a staff member. She explained with some urgency that she refused to sit anywhere near that family and needed the school to arrange seating that kept them separated for the duration of the event. School staff at graduation events enforce documented venue conduct policies, behavior that disrupts the ceremony or constitutes a genuine safety risk. They are not equipped, authorized, staffed for, or responsible for mediating interpersonal social dynamics between adult attendees before any conduct violation has actually occurred. Graduation seating at most schools is general admission, meaning there is no mechanism for the school to assign or enforce specific family locations for the purpose of conflict management between adults who simply dislike each other. The request to arrange seating separation presupposes that the school has both the staff capacity and the venue authority to monitor and enforce a seating map across hundreds of families in real time, neither of which exists at a standard graduation ceremony. Family-to-family conflicts at graduation ceremonies are documented in school administrator experience as among the most socially volatile pre-ceremony situations. Schools are advised by legal counsel to involve security if genuine safety concerns exist, not to attempt social mediation between parties with interpersonal grievances. The student conflict underlying the family conflict is, at the point of graduation, a resolved or concluding chapter. The students are leaving school, and the school's behavioral jurisdiction over student relationships does not extend to managing parent social dynamics on ceremony day. Asking the school to manage your seating to avoid another family is like asking an airline to rearrange all seats so you don't see a neighbor on the same flight. The venue is big enough. The responsibility for your own emotional management was always yours. 25. The graduation ceremony ended with graduates filing out to a student DJ's curated playlist. Music the class had chosen, music that meant something to them, music that sent them out of the building on their own terms. The Karen cornered the event coordinator the next morning. She used the word circus. She used the word undignified. She filed a formal complaint about the recessional music, and she wanted it on record that she found the departure from traditional orchestral format unacceptable. The recessional at graduation is a ceremonial custom, not a regulatory requirement. And the musical style of an exit has no bearing on the validity, dignity, or legal recognition of the degrees conferred during the ceremony. Graduation recessionals became standardized in American high schools primarily through the habits of band directors and venue coordinators in the mid-20th century. There is no governing body that has ever mandated a specific musical style for graduation exits. Many universities with centuries of academic tradition have modernized their recessional music to reflect student-selected playlists and contemporary compositions with no reduction in ceremony prestige. The concept of ceremony dignity is entirely subjective and culturally constructed. What one generation defines as dignified, the next frequently reinterprets, and the history of graduation music itself reflects that evolution across every decade. Student-curated exit music reflects genuine class identity and creates a more personally meaningful final ceremony moment. Research on memory formation and milestone events shows that personally resonant music creates stronger and more positive long-term memories than music selected by institutional habit. The event coordinator's job is to implement the school's ceremony plan, not to adjudicate one parent's musical preferences against the school's chosen format. Complaining the graduation recessional was too modern is like complaining that a retirement party played the retirees' favorite songs instead of the company anthem. The ceremony was for the graduates. The exit music was theirs. 26. The complaint arrived 2 weeks before graduation. She had a 2-page list of her daughter's clubs, sports, volunteer hours, awards, and honors, typed, formatted, printed, and she wanted every item read aloud when her daughter's name was called at the ceremony, because other families, she explained, needed to hear how hard her daughter had worked. The average graduation ceremony for 300 students, running at one name per 10 to 15 seconds, consumes 50 to 75 minutes for the diploma walk alone. Reading even a brief 5-item achievement list per student would extend this segment to over 5 hours. Many schools offer a separate senior banquet, award ceremony, or yearbook dedication specifically to provide extended individual recognition. The graduation ceremony itself is deliberately condensed to honor all graduates within a shared time frame that is already straining family patience. The legal and administrative framework of a graduation ceremony is built around equal treatment of all graduates. The school cannot provide extended biographical readings for one student without offering the same to every other student, which is operationally impossible by any measure. Parent satisfaction research consistently shows that families most frequently complain about graduation running too long, making the extended achievement reading request a direct contradiction of the same community's most common feedback year after year. Printed graduation programs already provide the primary vehicle for individual achievement recognition, listing honors, clubs, and accomplishments in print, serves the recognition function without consuming ceremony time that belongs to 300 other families. The desire for other families to hear how hard she worked is a social recognition need that the graduation ceremony is not designed to fulfill. It exists to mark completion of a program, not to rank individual achievements publicly for an audience that came for a different reason. Demanding 5 minutes of achievement reading per graduate is like asking every passenger on a flight to give a full personal introduction before takeoff. The plane is going the same place regardless. 27. The tickets were free. distributed to graduate families, 4 per household. She gave 2 of hers to neighbors who had no connection to any graduate and then stood at the door arguing with staff when they were turned away, insisting that because she had received the tickets, she had the right to give them to whoever she wanted. Graduation tickets issued by schools are venue access credentials, not personal property, and the terms of their issuance routinely include restrictions on transfer, specifically to ensure that seating goes to the families of actual graduates. Graduation tickets at public high schools are almost universally distributed at no charge. They carry no purchase price and therefore carry no property rights that would override the issuing institution's access policies. Ticket allocation systems are designed around a specific social contract. Limited venue seating is rationed equitably among graduating families, and transferring tickets to unaffiliated parties directly deprives other graduate families of access they were promised under that same contract. Event venues operating under a graduation contract with a school are legally authorized to enforce the school's access policies, including rejecting tickets presented by individuals who cannot demonstrate connection to a graduate. Schools that have faced organized ticket transfer abuse have responded by implementing name-based ticketing, ID verification at entry, and digital ticket systems, all of which create significant administrative overhead caused entirely by the behavior the Karen is defending. The practical harm of uncontrolled ticket transfer is documented. In cases where significant numbers of tickets went to non-family attendees, graduate families were turned away at the door. An outcome that generated formal legal complaints and administrative investigations the school had to manage after the fact. Giving your graduation tickets to the neighbors and arguing with doctor staff is like lending your work access badge to a stranger and disputing with building security that badges are transferable. They were issued to you for a specific purpose. They were never yours to redistribute. 28, she picked up the graduation program, held it up to the light, announced to the people seated near her that the paper felt cheap, and sent an email to the principal the following day demanding to know why the school had used bargain stock for such an important document. Graduation programs are informational documents, not commemorative artifacts, not legal records, not heirlooms, and the paper stock they are printed on has no bearing on their function, the ceremony's quality, or the school's respect for the students being honored. Graduation programs serve a single operational function, providing attendees with the order of events and a list of graduates' names, a function that is equally served by standard bond paper as by premium cardstock because the information is identical regardless of what it is printed on. School budgets for graduation program printing are drawn from general operating funds. The choice of paper stock reflects fiscal stewardship, not disrespect for graduates, and heavier paper stock can increase printing costs by 40 to 200% with no functional improvement to anything. The vast majority of graduation programs are discarded within 24 hours of the ceremony, making investment in premium materials a fiscal decision with near zero return on durability or long-term use by anyone. Professional event planners note that guest perception of event quality at graduation is driven almost entirely by the ceremony itself. The quality of sound, visibility, organization, and personal recognition, not by the weight of printed collateral that most attendees set down before the first name is called. Schools that have solicited feedback on graduation program satisfaction have never documented paper stock as a meaningful category in family responses. The concern exists only at the moment of the complaint, not in any measured data from any study of any kind. Complaining about graduation program paper stock is like rating a hospital by the quality of the discharge paperwork. The document told you what you needed to know. 29, she formally requested that the school provide all parent attendees with copies of every planned graduation speech at least 1 week in advance so that parents could flag inappropriate content before it was delivered. She framed this as responsible oversight. She meant it as a veto mechanism. Prior restraint, the suppression of speech before it occurs, is one of the most disfavored concepts in American constitutional law, and applying a parent review and veto model to student graduation speeches would constitute a textbook prior restraint system by any legal definition. Schools may review student speeches for content that falls into legally unprotected categories, obscenity, incitement, defamation, but the legal standard for pre-approval authority is narrow and specific and does not extend to general parent community oversight of student personal addresses. The idea that a graduation audience is vulnerable in a way that requires protective pre-screening contradicts the basic premise of a public community ceremony. These are adults and adults in training gathering voluntarily to hear student speakers address them. Student speakers selected through school-administered processes have typically already gone through staff review for basic content appropriateness. Adding a layer of general parent community review introduces viewpoint-based censorship risk that school legal counsel consistently and specifically advises against. Providing speech copies to several hundred attending families 1 week before the event would constitute an unofficial publication of the speech, potentially generating social media commentary and public controversy that the speaker, often a minor, did not consent to before ever approaching a microphone. The historical record of student graduation speeches does not show a pattern of harmful or dangerous content that would justify institutional prior review systems. The problem the Karen is trying to solve does not exist at any documented scale that would justify the constitutional machinery she is proposing. Demanding pre-approval copies of graduation speeches for parent review is like demanding movie scripts be submitted to the audience before filming. The speech is for the ceremony. Trust the process you already have. 30. The ceremony started 11 minutes late. The following morning, she sent an email to the principal, the superintendent, and 3 school board members demanding accountability for what she described as a failure of preparation. Large-scale public events involving hundreds of participants, live audio systems, venue logistics, and coordinated processions running within 11 minutes of their published start time are, by any professional event management standard, operating successfully. Professional event management standards define on-time performance for large public events as starting within 15 minutes of published time. 11 minutes is within industry norms for events of graduation's logistical complexity by a meaningful margin. Graduation processions involve coordinating 200 to 600 people in formal attire across multiple staging areas with live music to enter a venue in a specific order, a process that is inherently variable and sensitive to dozens of minor logistical factors that cannot all be controlled simultaneously. Audio system checks, venue setup completion, guest seating flow, and last-minute participant changes are all sources of startup delay that are entirely beyond administrative control on the ceremony day itself, regardless of how well the preceding weeks were managed. Post-ceremony satisfaction surveys do not show a statistically significant correlation between minor start time delays under 15 minutes and overall family satisfaction with the graduation experience. Families who had a good ceremony experience do not retroactively downgrade it because it started at 7:11 instead of 7. School administrators who have responded to delay complaints by implementing earlier start times and more aggressive crowd management have documented increased complaints about crowds not being seated comfortably and insufficient time for pre-ceremony family gathering, meaning the solution generates its own complaint. Demanding a formal accountability explanation for an 11-minute graduation delay is like filing a complaint with the airline because the captain taxied 2 minutes longer than the board showed. The plane landed. Everyone got there. The email was a choice you made. 31. The student had completed her graduation requirements in December, a full semester early, and chose to walk with her class at the June ceremony. Her mother contacted the school to demand that her daughter be listed first in the graduation program. Because she technically graduated first and the alphabetical listing was, in her framing, factually wrong. Graduation programs list participants in the ceremony, not in chronological order of requirement completion, and the organizational logic of a graduation program is alphabetical convenience, not academic timeline accuracy. Early graduation is an academic administrative status, not a ceremony seniority designation. Students who complete requirements early and choose to participate in the June ceremony do so as part of the graduating class cohort on equal ceremonial footing with every other student crossing that stage. Graduation programs have never historically been organized by completion date. No American school has ever produced a program ordered by the date each student's final credit was recorded, because that data is administratively irrelevant to ceremony logistics and would be illegible to any general audience. The claim that alphabetical listing is factually wrong misunderstands what the program represents. It is a ceremony participant list, not an academic transcript, and its order reflects logistical convention rather than chronological academic truth of any kind. Students who complete requirements early frequently have the option of walking at an earlier ceremony. If they choose to wait and walk with their cohort, they are accepting the logistical conventions of that ceremony, including alphabetical listing with every other person whose surname begins with the same letter. The argument that early completion creates listing priority would require schools to track and rank the exact completion date of every graduate's final credit. A logistical exercise with no educational or ceremonial value whatsoever. Demanding to be listed first because you finished credits in December is like demanding the first seat on a plane because you bought your ticket before anyone else. The boarding happened today. 32, the morning of graduation, she called the school to update the MC's pronunciation guide for her daughter's name. The programs were printed, the MC had been briefed. The ceremony was 4 hours away. The ask itself is not unreasonable. Name mispronunciation at graduation is a genuine equity concern with real cultural and personal significance, and research on naming and identity shows that correct pronunciation is a meaningful form of recognition, particularly for students from non-English speaking family backgrounds. Many school districts now implement formal name pronunciation processes as part of graduation planning, inviting students to submit audio recordings or phonetic guides weeks before the ceremony. These systems exist precisely to prevent mispronunciation and are the appropriate mechanism for exactly this concern. Phonetic guides for MCUs are typically printed during the week before graduation. A same morning change request requires reprinting or annotating that guide, a task that is feasible only if caught early enough and accompanied by clear written phonetic guidance provided immediately. The morning of graduation, the MC is in the midst of final preparation, audio checks, staging coordination, and participant briefings. The window for incorporating a pronunciation change is narrow, and its feasibility depends entirely on when the call arrives and what information accompanies it. The appropriate response to a morning of ceremony pronunciation request is triage. Can this be implemented, and if so, what phonetic guidance is the family prepared to provide right now? Not dismissal, but also not pretending the timing was anything other than late. Schools that have implemented proactive pronunciation systems have documented significantly reduced same-day name complaints, which means the problem is solvable at the planning stage, which is precisely where this family's energy should have gone 6 weeks earlier when the form was sent home. Calling the morning of graduation to change the pronunciation guide is like texting the caterer 3 hours before the wedding to change the entree. The ask is real. The timing made it nearly impossible. 33, she picked up the graduation program, held it up, and announced to the people around her that she objected to the class motto. It was too edgy. The grammar was imprecise. It did not reflect the values she had raised her daughter to hold. She wanted it changed, and she said so to anyone who would listen, including the principal, who she found near the stage entrance. A class motto is a student-selected expression of collective identity. It represents the graduating class, not the parental cohort. And no parent has retroactive veto authority over a democratic student vote on a symbolic phrase selected weeks or months before the ceremony. Class mottos are selected through student governance processes, class officer votes, student body polls, senior class elections, specifically designed to reflect the student community's voice rather than parent preferences. The role of a class motto is symbolic and ephemeral. It appears on programs, banners, and possibly a yearbook page, then fades from relevance, making philosophical or grammatical objections to it spectacularly disproportionate to its actual cultural impact on anyone. Parent objections to student-selected class mottos represent a documented category of administrative complaint that produces zero actionable outcomes. Schools do not overturn democratic student votes on symbolic matters in response to individual parent objections. and there is no mechanism by which they could. The premise that a class motto must reflect the values a parent taught their child fundamentally misunderstands what a class motto is. It represents the students as a cohort, not any individual family's value system or grammatical preferences. Class mottos throughout American high school history have frequently been unconventional, imprecise, jokey, or counterculture. And virtually none of the graduates who selected them look back decades later wishing a parent had intervened with a red pen. Demanding the class motto be changed because you dislike the phrasing is like demanding a class portrait be retaken because someone in the back row is making a face. The face was part of the class. 34, she decided that the graduation recessional should open with a national anthem. And when she discovered it would not, she threatened to contact the local media about the school's unpatriotic decision to open with a student-composed piece instead. She had the word unpatriotic ready. She used it more than once. There is no federal law, state education code, or binding administrative policy requiring public school graduation ceremonies to include the national anthem. Its inclusion is a tradition, not a legal obligation, and the tradition itself has a relatively recent and specific origin. The national anthem at public events became a widespread American custom, largely through Major League Baseball's adoption of the practice during World War II as a patriotic wartime gesture. Its migration to school ceremonies was cultural diffusion, not policy mandate issued by any educational authority. The U.S. Flag Code, which governs proper conduct around the flag and anthem, contains no provision requiring the anthem at school ceremonies. It addresses how to behave during performances, not when or whether those performances must occur. Hundreds of accredited American high schools and universities open graduation ceremonies with alternative music, invocations, or student performances annually with no legal consequences, no loss of accreditation, and no documented drop in graduate or family satisfaction. The First Amendment actually cuts against compelling schools to perform the anthem in West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. Decided in 1943, the Supreme Court ruled that compelled patriotic observance in schools is unconstitutional, and that ruling has never been overturned. Student-composed opening music represents an authentic, class-specific cultural artifact, a meaningfully more personal ceremonial opening for a specific graduating class than a standard performance of a song played at every sporting event all year. Demanding the national anthem open graduation because otherwise it's unpatriotic is like demanding every dinner party begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. The country is not less honored because the school orchestra played something original. 35. The sign language interpreter was positioned near the stage, visible to the portion of the audience that needed her, doing her job. The Karen found this distracting. She found it space-consuming. She approached a staff member to raise the concern, and her conclusion was direct. Nobody there needed it, and it should not have been arranged. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act require that public schools make their events meaningfully accessible to people with disabilities, including deaf and hard of hearing attendees. Sign language interpretation at graduation is a legal compliance measure, not an optional courtesy the school decided to offer based on aesthetic preference. The presence of an interpreter does not reduce the ceremony experience for hearing attendees in any documented way. Their position is specifically designed to provide sightline access for deaf attendees without obstructing the main ceremony view for anyone else. Complaining that an accessibility accommodation was distracting because you personally did not need it reflects a perspective that treats non-disabled people's aesthetic preferences as more important than disabled people's right to participate. A position directly contradicted by federal disability rights law in explicit terms. ASL interpretation is provided for any deaf or hard of hearing attendee present, family members, community members, or the graduates themselves, and the school is not required to publicly disclose who specifically requested or required it, meaning the Karen's claim that nobody needed it is based on zero information. The argument that interpretation is unnecessary because nobody needed it presupposes complete knowledge of the disability status of every person in the building. A presumption that is both factually impossible and legally irrelevant, since accessibility must be provided proactively rather than reactively. Schools that have reduced graduation accessibility services in response to similar complaints have faced formal AD complaints, Office for Civil Rights investigations, and documented legal settlements. Complaining that a sign language interpreter was distracting is like complaining that a wheelchair ramp ruins the building's aesthetic. The ramp was never for you. 36 by the end of graduation weekend, she had submitted 4 formal complaints, 2 social media posts tagging the school district, 1 call to the local newspaper, and a demand for a school board meeting. She described this to other parents as being passionate, involved, doing what any dedicated parent would do. Complaint volume is not a measure of parental investment, it is a measure of dissatisfaction. And there is a documented significant difference between advocating for your child's genuine needs and conducting a sustained disruption campaign against a community event that affected hundreds of other families simultaneously. Parental involvement research consistently identifies effective advocacy as targeted, specific, and proportionate. Parents who engage productively with schools on issues that affect their children's actual educational experience are documented as positive contributors to school community health and staff morale. The behaviors described, multi-channel complaint campaigns, media tagging, demand letters submitted simultaneously to multiple authorities, are documented in school administration literature as adversarial parent engagement, a pattern associated with increased administrator burnout, staff turnover, and deteriorating relationships between schools and the families they serve. Genuine parental investment in graduation is documented in the form of volunteering for ceremony coordination, supporting student speech preparation, contributing to class gift organization, and attending events. Activities that create the ceremony rather than critique every element of it after the fact. The reframing of disruptive complaint behavior as dedication is a documented rationalization pattern in which the behavior's social cost is obscured by attaching it to a universally valued identity, dedicated parent, rather than examining what the behavior actually produced for anyone. School administrators who document high complaint parents report that the specific concerns driving the complaints are, in the majority of cases, unresolvable by any administrative action, meaning the complaints continue regardless of outcome. The graduates whose ceremony was the subject of all of this had one graduation. One. And they deserved for the primary parental narrative of that day to be celebration. 37, a Karen connected to a local city council member pushed hard to have that official added to the graduation program as a speaker, insisting that a community leader's presence would validate the ceremony and that the school was being politically difficult by declining. She framed the refusal as a snub. It was actually standard administrative caution dressed up as nothing more than good judgment. Graduation ceremony speaker selection is entirely within the school's administrative discretion, and inviting elected officials to address a captive audience of minors and their families carries specific legal and ethical complications that justify schools declining every single time. The Supreme Court's establishment of viewpoint neutrality standards in school speech means that if a school invites one political figure to speak, it opens the door to demands from figures across the political spectrum, a logistical and legal minefield that most school attorneys recognize immediately. School boards and administrators are specifically trained to recognize and avoid the appearance of political endorsement. A ceremony featuring a partisan elected official effectively associates the school with that official's party and positions in ways that families across the political divide will notice. Student satisfaction research on graduation speeches consistently shows that local political figures rank among the lowest rated speaker categories, behind students, teachers, and community members. Because their addresses tend toward generic civic messaging disconnected from the graduating class sitting in front of them, several school districts have faced community complaints and board-level investigations after allowing elected officials to use graduation addresses for messaging that families perceived as political campaigning. Creating exactly the controversy schools aim to avoid at what is supposed to be a celebration. The Karen's personal connection to the official is a textbook conflict of interest. Using a child's graduation as a political visibility opportunity for an adult acquaintance is the opposite of what the ceremony is designed to do. Demanding a city council member speak at graduation because you know them personally is like asking your dentist to give a toast at your friend's wedding. The credential is real, the connection to the moment is not. 38, the student-produced graduation slideshow was finished. The yearbook team had spent weeks on it. Then, a Karen discovered it existed and decided she needed to be part of the production process, not as a contributor, but as an editorial authority, insisting that parent-submitted photos must be included alongside student-submitted images and threatening to attend the planning meeting uninvited when told the slideshow was student-curated. Student-produced graduation slideshows are student projects, not community photo albums. And the adults whose children appear in them have no editorial rights over a creative work they did not produce and were not invited to join. Graduation slideshows produced by student media classes, yearbook teams, or audiovisual clubs are educational creative products, and the students who produce them hold the editorial authority over their content, subject to school staff oversight and not to parent preference. FERPA protections apply in instructive ways here. Parents do not have the right to demand their child's image appear in a school-produced media product any more than they have the right to demand changes to a yearbook spread they disagree with. The participation of parent photos would require collecting, organizing, and quality checking submissions from potentially hundreds of families, a task that transforms a student creative project into a parent management exercise, consuming significant staff time that was never budgeted for this purpose. Student-curated slideshows reflect the genuine social world of the graduating class, the friendships, moments, and experiences students themselves valued, which are frequently and legitimately different from what parents would select if given the option. A parent who attends an uninvited planning meeting for a student creative project is not an advocate. She is an intruder in a student's educational activity, and the school has both the right and the obligation to ask her to leave. Demanding editorial input on the student graduation slideshow is like calling the school newspaper to demand your preferred headline. The students made it. Your subscription does not come with a vote. 39, 2 weeks before graduation, a Karen contacted the school office to request that the school arrange a supervised childcare area during the ceremony for younger siblings because bringing small children to the venue was stressful and she believed the school should support families by solving this problem for her. Schools are legally classified as providing childcare only for enrolled students during school hours under specific regulatory frameworks. Offering supervised childcare to non-enrolled siblings during an after-hours public event creates entirely new legal liability, staffing certification requirements, and supervision ratios that schools are not equipped to manage under any circumstances. Supervision of non-enrolled minors at a school-hosted event creates liability exposure under state child care licensing laws. In most states, informal supervision arrangements would require licensed child care staff, background-checked personnel ratios, and specific facility certifications the school does not hold for this context and was never funded to obtain. The school's duty of care applies to its enrolled students. It does not extend to the siblings, cousins, and other family members of graduates who choose to bring children to an evening public event that was never designed as a childcare facility. Family event planning, including arrangements for younger siblings, is a parental responsibility that is universally accepted as such at every other public event, concerts, sporting events, community gatherings, none of which provide complimentary childcare as a condition of attendance. Multiple school districts that have explored providing ceremony day childcare as a family service have determined that the liability, staffing, and certification barriers make it operationally impractical without a dedicated program budget and infrastructure that does not exist in any standard school graduation planning framework. The request to support families conflates the school's educational support role with a full-service family lifestyle concierge role that is neither funded nor legally appropriate for the institution. Asking the school to babysit younger siblings during graduation is like asking the restaurant to watch your kids while you enjoy dinner. They cooked the meal. The childcare was always going to be your arrangement. 40, her son had transferred from one high school to another in his junior year, and she wanted him listed in both schools' graduation programs, the one he left and the one conferring his diploma, because he had been part of both communities, and omission from the first school's program was, in her words, erasing his history. Graduation programs are official school documents listing students who are earning credentials from that specific institution. They are not community membership registers, and appearing in a graduation program has a specific and narrow meaning that cannot be extended to former attendees who completed their requirements somewhere else. Including a student who transferred away and is earning his diploma at a different school would be factually inaccurate in the program of the school he left. It would suggest to every attendee that he was receiving a diploma from that institution, which he was not. FERPA protections would complicate including a former student's name in an official school publication without current enrollment. The school where the student no longer attends has diminished authority to publish their name in official documents, regardless of how warmly they are remembered. No school district in any documented case has ever included non-graduating former students in official graduation programs. The practice has no precedent because the logical and legal barriers are immediately obvious to any administrator who considers it for more than 30 seconds. The student's history at the first school is preserved through attendance records, transcript documentation, and personal memories and relationships. None of these require official program inclusion to be valid, honored, or real in any meaningful sense. Demanding a student be listed in two schools' graduation programs is like demanding your name appear on the roster of a team you left mid-season because you were part of the early practices. The trophy goes to the team that finished. The program lists the graduates. 41, she set up a full personal live stream of the graduation ceremony on her social media channel without informing the school, captured and broadcast dozens of students without consent, and when staff asked her to stop, she argued that it was a public event and she could film anything she wanted. While graduation ceremonies occur in spaces where general photography is permitted, deliberately broadcasting identifiable images of minors without parental consent raises documented legal complications that significantly complicate the public event defense she was so confident in deploying. FERPA protects the educational records and personally identifiable information of students, and while a live ceremony is not a classroom, broadcasting students' names alongside their images in a way that links identity to educational milestone creates a FERPA-adjacent privacy concern that school legal teams take seriously enough to address in their pre-ceremony communications. Many states have specific laws governing the photography and broadcasting of minors. California's extensions of children's online privacy protections, for example, impose restrictions on broadcasting minors' images on commercial or monetized platforms without parental consent, and similar frameworks exist in other jurisdictions. Schools typically publish photography and recording policies in graduation communications, and these policies are often part of the venue's own terms of use for the event, making compliance not merely a courtesy, but a condition of attendance. A parent live streaming on a personal social media account is broadcasting to an undefined, potentially global audience. An audience that no other family consented to when they attended what they understood to be a school community event for their own family. Schools that have dealt with unauthorized ceremony live streams have documented subsequent incidents involving screenshots being used for harassment and targeting of identified minors, making the policy concern substantive rather than bureaucratic. Live streaming a graduation ceremony full of minors without consent because it's a public event is like broadcasting your neighbor's backyard party to strangers because you can see it from the street. The visibility doesn't equal permission. 42, she was volunteering as a ceremony coordinator near the stage entrance. A graduate approached, visibly nervous, overwhelmed, holding 12 years of accumulated pressure in his shoulders, and she told him to smile before he walked. "It's graduation," she said, as though the instruction were a kindness. When the official stage photo captured his authentic expression instead of a manufactured one, She complained to the photography coordinator that the image was wrong and needed to be addressed. A graduation stage photo is a document of a real person at a real moment, and the emotional authenticity of that moment belongs entirely to the graduate, not to a volunteer with a preferred aesthetic outcome. Photography research on portrait satisfaction consistently shows that candid, emotionally authentic images are rated as more meaningful and are preserved longer than posed, instructed expressions. A real graduation photo of a real emotional moment has documented higher personal value than a forced smile produced on command. A student's emotional state at graduation, nervousness, overwhelm, relief, complicated grief, is entirely their own and reflects a real human response to a genuine milestone that they are entitled to experience without external management from someone wearing a lanyard. Volunteer ceremony coordinators have no authority over how graduates present themselves on stage. Their role is logistical, guiding movement and managing flow, not aesthetic, directing emotional expression for the comfort of the adults observing. The instruction to just smile, directed at a visibly overwhelmed person, is documented in psychological literature as an invalidating communication that increases rather than decreases emotional distress. It is specifically what trained counselors are taught never to do. The photo coordinator's job is to capture the moment, not to manufacture a specific moment on behalf of a volunteer who prefers a certain version of what graduation happiness is supposed to look like. Telling a graduate to smile for their photo is like telling a marathon finisher to look less tired at the finish line. The face they're making is exactly the right face. 43. The Booster Club president made her case at the school board meeting with genuine urgency. Graduation should be moved because it fell on the same weekend as a regional sporting championship, and athletes deserve to have both experiences. The argument sounded reasonable on the surface. Underneath it was a request to reschedule a ceremony for hundreds of families, held at a venue, booked months in advance under a signed contract, to accommodate a scheduling conflict affecting a subset of the graduating class. Graduation dates are set by districts in advance based on venue availability, academic calendar requirements, and state testing windows. Athletic championship dates, set by separate athletic associations on a different timeline, inevitably conflict with school calendar dates in some years, and this is a systemic reality, not a targeted injustice. Individual student accommodation for athletic conflicts, including alternate diploma presentation, early walk participation, or deferred attendance, is the documented standard response that schools use when specific students face specific documented conflicts, and it works. Rescheduling graduation for an entire class because of a conflict affecting athletes at a regional championship ignores the scheduling needs of every other family in the building and is logistically and contractually impractical by any measure. State athletic associations schedule championship events on a regional calendar that cannot account for the graduation schedules of all participating schools. The conflict is systemic and affects some schools somewhere every single year. Athletes who face genuine graduation championship conflicts are typically given specific accommodation options by both the school and the athletic association. The idea that students must choose is often a false dilemma that booster parents present without having explored what the accommodation options actually are. The Booster Club president's conflict of interest, advocacy for athletes as her specific constituency, is not a neutral input into a district-wide scheduling decision. Demanding graduation move for the championship is like demanding the city reschedule a marathon because a few runners also signed up for a triathlon. The calendar serves everyone. 44. After the ceremony, the Karen pulled aside the principal to formally complain that graduation had ended with graduates filing out to student-selected music rather than a traditional orchestral recessional. She used the word circus. She said she was embarrassed for the school. She wanted it on record. There was no record to put it on because the musical style of a graduation exit is not a policy matter. It is a ceremonial custom, and the school chose it deliberately, with the graduates for the graduates. Graduation recessionals became standardized in American high schools primarily through the habits of band directors and venue coordinators in the mid-20th century. There is no governing body that has ever mandated a specific musical style for graduation exits. because there is no educational authority that has jurisdiction over the question. Many universities with centuries of documented academic tradition have modernized their recessional music to reflect student-selected playlists and contemporary compositions with no reduction in ceremony prestige or institutional credibility. The concept of ceremony dignity is subjective and culturally constructed. What one generation defines as dignified, the next reinterprets, and the history of graduation music reflects that evolution across every decade of American education without exception. Student-curated exit music reflects genuine class identity and creates a more personally meaningful final ceremony moment. Research on memory formation in milestone events shows that personally resonant music creates stronger and more positive long-term memories than music selected by institutional habit with no connection to the specific class. The event coordinator's job is to implement the school's ceremony plan, not to adjudicate one parent's musical preferences against a format the school chose intentionally. Complaining that the graduation recessional was undignified because it was contemporary is like complaining that a retirement party played the retirees' favorite songs instead of whatever the company always played at formal events. The ceremony was for the graduates. The music was theirs. 45, she spent a significant portion of her pre-ceremony time in the lobby telling other parents and any staff member who would listen that when she graduated, ceremonies were done properly. Describing a ceremony from 25 years ago as the standard against which the current event should be measured and found decisively lacking. Graduation ceremonies evolve intentionally to reflect the graduating class, the current community, and contemporary educational values. A ceremony from 25 years ago was designed for a different class in a different context by different people, and it carries no authority over the one happening today. American high school graduation ceremonies have changed dramatically across every decade of the 20th and 21st centuries. Formats, music, speech styles, recognition practices, and ceremony length have all shifted repeatedly, and no single era's format represents a canonical standard against which all others should be evaluated. The graduating class of any given year is a unique community with its own identity, cultural references, social experiences, and values. A ceremony designed to reflect them should differ from one designed to reflect a class a quarter century prior, because those are different groups of people. Nostalgia research in psychology shows that memory of one's own graduation tends to be idealized over time. The ceremony a parent remembers as perfect was, in real time, also criticized by other parents of that era for departing from their own graduation norms, which were themselves criticized by the generation before them. The purpose of a graduation ceremony is to honor the students completing their program, not to recreate a format that honored a different group of students in a different decade for a different audience than the one seated in the building today. Every adult attendee at graduation was once a graduate whose ceremony was criticized by someone older. The cycle of this isn't how we did it is the most documented and least productive form of graduation commentary in American school culture. Using your own graduation as a standard is like insisting every smartphone should work like the first one you owned. 46, she filed a multi-page formal written complaint about the graduation ceremony and submitted it simultaneously to the school board, the superintendent, the local newspaper, and the State Department of Education. Then she followed up weekly, demanding to know what policy changes were being implemented in response to her concerns. A formal written complaint is a mechanism for documenting a concern and requesting administrative review. It is not a policy change trigger, not a veto mechanism, and not a guarantee of any specific outcome beyond acknowledgement and a response letter delivered within the district's documented timeline. School board and superintendent complaint processes are governed by district policy. The standard response involves acknowledgement, review by appropriate staff, and a written response. Not an automatic policy change based on the substance of the complaint, regardless of how many agencies received a copy of it. State departments of education have jurisdiction over specific categories of complaint involving legal compliance. They do not review or adjudicate disputes about graduation music, program paper stock, ceremony recessional format, or any of the other ceremonial preferences the Karen had documented across 4 pages. Most graduation-related complaints, when reviewed by school administrators, are found to involve no policy violation, meaning the administrative conclusion is that no change is warranted, which is a legitimate outcome that the complaint process is designed to produce. The follow-up demand for weekly status updates consumes administrative time in a way that is disproportionate to the complaint's scope. School administrators are not legally required to provide weekly updates on complaint reviews, and the demand for them does not accelerate the process. Research on public institution complaint systems shows that complaints accompanied by media pressure tactics produce outcomes based on institutional risk management rather than the complaint's merits, a dynamic that rewards escalation over substance. Filing a multi-agency complaint about graduation and demanding weekly policy updates is like calling the city, county, state, and newspaper because your neighbor's lawn was an inch too long. The system you engaged was not built for this. 47, she contacted the school to formally object to a student being selected as a graduation keynote speaker, insisting that a real adult, a local business owner, a politician, a clergy member should deliver the main address because students simply don't have enough life experience to speak meaningfully to a graduation audience. Student commencement speakers are among the most emotionally resonant, highly rated, and widely shared speakers at graduation ceremonies, and the assumption that age equals meaningful speech is contradicted by virtually every study on audience engagement at graduation events ever conducted. Post-ceremony surveys collected by school districts consistently show that student-delivered speeches receive higher audience engagement ratings and are remembered more vividly by graduates years later than addresses delivered by adult guest speakers brought in for the occasion. The tradition of student commencement addresses is older than the tradition of adult guest speakers at American graduations. In the 19th century, graduation was explicitly a student showcase, with adult addresses being the exception rather than the rule that the Karen imagines. Research on persuasive communication shows that audiences are significantly more emotionally engaged by speakers they perceive as peers or authentic representatives of the experience being marked, making a fellow graduate a structurally superior speaker choice for a graduation audience by the standards of the discipline. Some of the most widely circulated and quoted graduation speeches in internet history, videos with millions of views and years of circulation, were delivered by students at both high school and university ceremonies, not by credentialed adult professionals. Adult guest speakers at graduation ceremonies frequently deliver addresses focused on their own career narratives with little specific connection to the graduating class. A disconnect that audiences consistently rate lower in post-event feedback. Insisting an adult speak at graduation because students lack experience is like hiring someone else to tell your story because you haven't lived long enough to tell it correctly. They earned the stage. The microphone is theirs. 48, a tearful mother in the row ahead of her was crying during the ceremony, openly, audibly, in the way that people cry when they watch their child walk across a stage after 12 years of packed lunches, homework battles, and early mornings. The Karen tapped her on the shoulder and told her, audibly, to compose herself because the crying was making a scene. Crying at graduation is not a behavioral problem. It is a neurologically normal, socially appropriate, and culturally universal response to witnessing the completion of a major human milestone by someone you have loved for years. Neuroscientists studying emotional response to ritual events categorize graduation as a peak, meaning moment, an event type that reliably triggers limbic system activation, including the release of cortisol and oxytocin, producing the physical experience of emotion that includes tears as a documented biological output. Crying in public at culturally significant events is documented as normal and accepted behavior across virtually every studied human culture. The stigmatization of visible emotion at milestone ceremonies is a specific cultural artifact of certain mid-20th century American social norms, not a universal standard that applies to everyone in every room. Research on social cohesion at group ceremonies shows that visible emotional expression, including tears, increases the perceived meaningfulness of the event for other attendees rather than diminishing their experience of it. The act of telling another adult how to manage their emotional response in a public setting without any safety or disruption concern constitutes a social boundary violation that behavioral psychologists categorize as intrusive and controlling behavior. No graduation policy in any documented American school district includes a prohibition on parental emotional expression during the ceremony. The Karen invented the rule she was enforcing. Telling someone not to cry at their child's graduation is like telling someone not to laugh at a comedy. The event produced that response on purpose. Sit down, hand them a tissue. 49, the stage photo moment was happening. The graduate was crossing. The professional graduation photographer was in position, mid-shot, when the Karen stepped directly in front of the camera, with her phone raised, physically blocking the contracted photographer's sightline, and then arguing with venue staff that she had just as much right to take photos as anyone else in the building. Professional ceremony photographers operate under venue contracts that include specific staging, positioning, and access agreements with the school. These agreements create operational zones that are the functional equivalent of a stage crew work area, not open territory available to any ticketed guest who wants a better angle. Obstructing a contracted service provider in the performance of their work, including physically blocking their equipment view, exposes the obstructing party to venue removal under the conduct policies that govern attendance at school events, which are published in advance. The photos produced by professional graduation photographers are often the primary lasting documentation of the diploma handshake moment. A parent's obstructed phone photo is not an equivalent substitute for the professional image, and the obstruction removes the professional image entirely from the record for that family. General admission event attendance grants access to designated public viewing areas, not unlimited freedom of movement throughout the venue. A distinction that is standard in event management and has been legally tested and upheld in public event contexts. Many schools have responded to this exact category of disruption by establishing formally barricaded photographer zones and hiring security to maintain clear sightlines, noting in pre-ceremony communications that encroachment on photographer positions will result in removal from the venue. The equal right argument fails on its own terms. The photographer's right to occupy a designated work position under a venue contract outranks a ticketed guest's preference for that specific location by every applicable standard. Standing in front of the graduation photographer because you also have a phone is like walking onto a broadcast field because you also have eyes. The credentials are different. 50, she raised a formal objection to the cultural performance segment of the graduation ceremony, specifically to the fact that her family's cultural background was not specifically featured while another group's traditional music and dance were included. Her proposed solution was binary, either include every cultural group equally or remove all cultural recognition entirely in the name of fairness. Cultural programming at graduation reflects student groups who organize, prepared, and offer to contribute to the ceremony. It is not a school-mandated demographic sampling exercise requiring mathematical representation of every group present in the building. Anti-discrimination law prohibits excluding groups from participation based on protected characteristics. It does not require equal airtime for every demographic group's cultural expression as a proactive mandate that schools must fulfill regardless of whether any student group organized a contribution. The include everyone equally or include no one. False binary is a documented rhetorical strategy that uses the language of fairness to achieve the elimination of representation for groups that did organize and present, an outcome that serves no one's actual equity interests and leaves every student with less. Schools cannot feature cultural performances that were not organized, prepared, and offered by student groups. The programming reflects student initiative, and the absence of a performance by a particular group reflects a logistical reality about what was organized, not a discriminatory editorial choice by the school. Cultural programming at graduation has been shown in research to increase ceremony meaning and family engagement for students and families whose cultural identity is reflected. Removing it to achieve surface-level uniformity reduces meaning for everyone without creating genuine equity for anyone. The appropriate response to feeling one's cultural identity is absent from graduation programming is to organize a cultural student group, prepare a contribution, and offer it through the process every other group used. Demanding all cultural performances be removed because yours wasn't included is like demanding all flowers be pulled from a garden because yours wasn't planted. The garden didn't exclude you. 51, she somehow learned that the student keynote speaker's address included jokes, and she found him before the ceremony to warn him that this was not the time for comedy. When the speech earned genuine, sustained laughter from the entire audience, she filed a complaint with the principal arguing that the speech had been inappropriate and undignified. Humor in graduation speeches is a documented, ancient, and universally valued element of commencement address tradition. And a speech that makes an audience laugh while also moving them is not a lesser speech by any measurable standard. It is a better one. Commencement speech humor has a documented history stretching back to medieval European university graduation ceremonies, where student orations frequently included wit, wordplay, and comedic commentary on academic life as a central rather than peripheral feature. Research on audience memory of public speeches consistently shows that speeches incorporating appropriate humor are remembered more clearly, rated more favorably, and quoted more often than speeches of identical length that maintain strict solemnity throughout. The laughter is a feature, not a flaw. Many of the most widely shared, quoted, and celebrated commencement addresses in American history at institutions with centuries of academic tradition are celebrated partly or primarily for their humor, which did not prevent them from being considered serious and meaningful by the audiences who received them. Humor in a graduation speech serves a specific social function. It releases the emotional tension of a high-stakes moment, creates shared experience among hundreds of attendees with different relationships to the event, and makes abstract advice more memorable by anchoring it in a moment the listener can recall. A student who can make hundreds of people laugh together genuinely at a graduation ceremony has demonstrated communication skill and emotional intelligence that is more impressive than reading a serious speech from an index card at a podium. Telling a student their graduation speech is too funny is like telling a great teacher their class is too engaging. The laughter meant everyone was listening. That is the entire goal. 52, she raised a formal objection at the school board meeting to the fact that a student who had not achieved high academic marks had received recognition at graduation for community service and personal resilience. And she wanted the board to clarify that only GPA-based honors belonged in a graduation ceremony because anything else diluted the achievement of students who had earned their grades. The U.S. Department of Education's framework for whole child education explicitly identifies social emotional development, civic engagement, arts, and physical development as equal pillars of a complete education alongside academic achievement. Meaning the school was not departing from educational standards by recognizing diverse achievement, it was reflecting them. Community service recognition at graduation has been a documented practice in American schools since at least the 1960s, expanding significantly after the National and Community Service Trust Act of 1993 formalized service learning as a component of American secondary education that schools are encouraged to honor publicly. Research on long-term graduate outcomes consistently shows that non-GPA factors, leadership, community engagement, creative achievement, are stronger predictors of life satisfaction and career success than GPA alone for the majority of graduates, which means the recognition is tracking something real. Athletic, artistic, and civic achievements in high school represent hundreds of hours of dedicated effort, often exceeding the time investment of maintaining a high grade point average, making their exclusion from recognition an arbitrary distinction that benefits no one and honors nothing. Recognition at graduation is not a zero-sum system. Acknowledging one group's achievement does not erase another's, and the presence of diverse recognition categories reflects the diverse ways in which students actually succeed across 12 years of schooling. Insisting graduation only recognize grades is like insisting a town's annual celebration only honor the tallest buildings. The community was built by more than one kind of effort. The ceremony was for all of them. 53, the family behind her at the graduation ceremony, was loud. Their guests were taking up space. They had brought small children who made noise at various points during the 2-hour event. She found a staff member and filed a verbal complaint, demanding the school take action against the family and insisting the school had allowed this situation and should have prevented it. Schools are responsible for enforcing documented conduct policies within their venue, behavior that rises to the level of genuine disruption or safety risk. They are not responsible for controlling the full range of human behavior from several hundred independent families attending a public community event simultaneously, and no staffing ratio makes that possible. Graduation ceremonies are public events attended by families who are not vetted, trained, or contracted to behave according to any individual attendee's personal preference. The school's code of conduct governs behavior that actively prevents the event from proceeding, not noise variance between neighboring families in a large venue. The legal standard for disruption at a school event is meaningfully specific. It involves behavior that prevents the event from proceeding, not behavior that one attendee finds annoying from where they happen to be seated. Children at graduation ceremonies are a universally acknowledged and expected demographic. Families with young siblings, cousins, and children of graduates attend every year, and their presence is a foreseeable aspect of a community celebration that was never designed to be child-free. The filing of a formal complaint against a private family for their general demeanor at a public event, absent any actual policy violation, has no administrative mechanism for resolution because there is nothing to adjudicate and no authority to adjudicate it. School administrators document neighbor family complaints as among the most resource-consuming and outcome-limited complaint types they manage after graduation. Demanding the school discipline the loud family behind you is like calling City Hall to report a neighbor who laughed too hard at a public concert. Nobody was assigned to manage your acoustics. 54, the student had $14.50 in outstanding library fines. The Karen, in this case the enforcer of a school policy rather than a parent, insisted the student be barred from participating in the graduation ceremony until the balance was cleared, citing district policy and refusing any exception regardless of circumstance. Using graduation ceremony participation as a collection mechanism for minor outstanding financial obligations is a practice that has been legally challenged, publicly condemned, and abandoned by the majority of American school districts that attempted it after examining what it actually produced. California passed specific legislation in 2020 explicitly prohibiting public schools from withholding transcripts, diplomas, or records from students based on outstanding fees, a law prompted by documented cases of students losing college admission offers because schools withheld transcripts over small balances during exactly this kind of enforcement. The legal principle of proportionality, that institutional consequences must be proportionate to the infraction, is central to administrative law, and withholding a once-in-a-lifetime ceremony from a student over $14 fails the standard by any reasonable measure applied in any jurisdiction. The financial recovery value of graduation ceremony exclusion as a collection tool is zero. Students barred from graduation are not meaningfully more likely to pay fines afterward, and the reputational and legal cost to the school of implementing such a policy typically exceeds the amount being collected from any individual student. Educational equity advocates note that outstanding school fines are disproportionately concentrated among students from low-income families, making fine-based graduation exclusion a policy that functions as a class-based barrier to milestone participation, dressed up as neutral enforcement. The emotional harm of being barred from graduation over a minor financial matter is documented and significant. School counselors describe it as a rupture of the student-school relationship at the most critical transition point in that student's life. Barring a student from graduation for $14 is like a hotel refusing checkout because you took a pen, send the invoice, give the kid the stage. 55, a June outdoor graduation ceremony featured warm weather, and a Karen filed a formal complaint with the district insisting that the school had created dangerous health conditions and was legally obligated to provide a climate-controlled environment for the event. There is no federal law, no state education code, and no binding administrative policy requiring that graduation ceremonies be held in air-conditioned environments, and outdoor ceremonies in warm weather, while physically uncomfortable for people who underprepared, are not inherently unsafe conditions, triggering any legal obligation. OSHA regulations governing temperature in workplaces apply to employees in work settings. They do not apply to attendees at public community events, including school graduation ceremonies held on school grounds in June. The legal threshold for dangerous health conditions in a public event context involves documented heat illness risk factors. Extreme temperatures combined with lack of shade, inadequate water access, and no medical staff. Not general warm weather at an outdoor community gathering. Outdoor graduation ceremonies in warm climates have been held safely across America for decades, and standard mitigation measures including water distribution, shade structures, shortened ceremony length, and medical personnel on site are documented best practices that schools routinely implement before a complaint is ever filed. The choice of an outdoor venue is frequently driven by the need to accommodate more family members than any available indoor venue can hold. Trading some comfort for greater capacity is a deliberate, family-serving decision that benefits the majority of attendees. Climate-controlled indoor venues large enough to seat graduation audiences in most communities cost significantly more than outdoor facilities. Mandating air conditioning would either dramatically increase graduation costs or eliminate ceremonies at schools unable to afford qualifying venues. Demanding air conditioning at an outdoor graduation is like demanding a beach have indoor temperature controls before you'll visit. The outdoor was the point. Bring water. Wear cotton under the gown. The diploma does not melt. 56 weather radar showed a 30% chance of light rain within the next 2 hours, and a Karen began loudly insisting the outdoor graduation ceremony be canceled before it started because she was unwilling to risk getting wet and believed the school was being reckless by proceeding. A 30% chance of rain is, by definition, a 70% chance of no rain. And postponing a logistically complex event involving hundreds of families, a signed venue contract, and months of planning based on a minority weather probability is operationally irrational by any professional event management standard. Event management professionals define a weather threshold for outdoor event postponement differently than any individual attendee's comfort level. Standard protocols involve confirmed severe weather such as lightning within a set radius, sustained high winds, or significant precipitation, not probability forecasts sitting below the 50% mark. Canceling or postponing graduation based on a 30% rain probability would require rescheduling a venue contract, re-notifying hundreds of families, coordinating alternate travel arrangements, and potentially forfeiting non-refundable deposits. Real financial and logistical costs triggered by a weather probability that is, by definition, the minority outcome. Light rain at an outdoor graduation is physically uncomfortable and aesthetically imperfect. It is not a safety hazard, and schools routinely continue outdoor ceremonies in light rain with appropriate advance communication to families about what to expect and bring. Families attending outdoor graduation ceremonies are communicated weather contingency policies in advance. Those who choose not to bring rain protection make a personal planning decision, not an institutional liability claim that the school is obligated to resolve. The social cost of canceling graduation for hundreds of families based on one family's comfort preference is incalculably larger than the inconvenience of attending in light rain for 90 minutes. Demanding graduation be canceled over a 30% rain chance is like calling off the picnic because the weather app showed a cloud. The forecast is a probability, not a promise. Bring an umbrella. 57, she appointed herself the unofficial gatekeeper of the family reserve section before the ceremony started and physically blocked a graduate's grandmother and step-parent from sitting there, insisting that family section meant immediate family, biological parents only, and that these individuals did not qualify under her personal definition of the term. Family at a graduation ceremony is defined by the graduate and their household, not by biological relationship criteria invented and enforced by another attendee who has no administrative role, no venue authority, and no standing to make that determination for anyone other than herself. The legal and social definition of family in the United States is broad and explicitly not limited to biological parentage. Step-parents, grandparents, foster parents, legal guardians, and chosen family members are legally and socially recognized relationships that carry no lesser standing in any public context. Schools do not publish a biological parent-only policy for graduation seating. Any family section designations are meant to accommodate the people who are significant to the graduate, as defined by the graduate and their household, not by a stranger with strong opinions. No other attendee has any authority, legal, administrative, or moral, to determine who qualifies as a graduate's family based on their own taxonomy of acceptable relationships. Multi-generational, blended, and non-traditional family structures are the documented demographic reality for a significant portion of American students. A biological-only definition of family would exclude meaningful caregivers and loved ones for a large percentage of the graduating class. The physical act of blocking a person from a publicly accessible seating area, absent any documented venue, policy being violated, is a confrontational action that constitutes harassment under most behavioral definitions. And school administrators who become aware of it intervene on behalf of the blocked family member every time. Blocking a grandmother from the family section because she's not a biological parent is like checking blood types at a Thanksgiving table. The family was assembled by love and by life. 58, the school had arranged for a sign language interpreter to be positioned near the stage, visible to the portion of the audience that needed her. A Karen found this arrangement distracting, concluded that nobody there needed it, and contacted a staff member before the ceremony to suggest the interpreter should not have been arranged. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act require that public schools make their events meaningfully accessible to people with disabilities, including deaf and hard of hearing attendees. Sign language interpretation at graduation is a legal compliance measure, not an optional aesthetic decision the school made and can unmake based on one attendee's preference. The presence of an interpreter positioned near the stage does not reduce the ceremony experience for hearing attendees in any documented way. Their positioning is specifically designed to provide sightline access for deaf attendees without obstructing the main ceremony view for anyone else in the building. Complaining that an accessibility accommodation is distracting because you personally do not need it reflects a perspective that treats non-disabled people's aesthetic comfort as more important than disabled people's right to participate. A position that federal disability rights law contradicts in explicit terms. ASL interpretation is provided for any deaf or hard of hearing attendee present, family members, community members, or the graduates themselves. And the school is not required to publicly disclose who specifically requested or required it, making the claim that nobody needed it based on zero actual information. The argument that interpretation is unnecessary because nobody needed it presupposes complete knowledge of the disability status of every person in the venue. A presumption that is both factually impossible and legally irrelevant, since accessibility must be provided proactively rather than reactively after someone asks. Schools that have reduced graduation accessibility services in response to similar complaints have faced formal ADA complaints and Office for Civil Rights investigations. Complaining that a sign language interpreter was distracting is like complaining that a wheelchair ramp ruins the building's look. The ramp was never for you. 59, a graduate did something unexpected on stage. He had an emotional moment. His section gave him a standing ovation that ran longer than the Karen preferred. And in her post-ceremony Facebook post, in her complaint email, and at the parent forum the following week, she insisted that her child's graduation had been completely ruined by this single moment, created by one of the several hundred graduates sharing the ceremony that day. A graduation ceremony for a large class is a multi-hour event containing dozens of distinct, memorable moments. The idea that a single unexpected or emotionally charged moment retroactively erases everything else that happened is not how human experience or memory works by any documented standard. Post-ceremony surveys across multiple school districts consistently show that unexpected, emotional, or surprising moments at graduation, including stage surprises, spontaneous reactions, and extended ovations, are among the most frequently cited positive memories of the ceremony, not complaints. The psychological concept of the Pekan Rule, documented by Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, shows that people's memory of an experience is disproportionately shaped by its most emotionally intense moment and its ending, meaning the moment the Karen is calling a disruption is likely the most memorable part of the ceremony for almost everyone else who was there. The graduate who created that moment was also a graduate with their own family, their own story, and their own right to be fully present at their own milestone. Framing his authentic moment as a ruination of someone else's ceremony is a profound centering of the Karen's preferences at the expense of another student's experience. The graduating class's collective diploma is equally valid regardless of what happened at any other moment on the same stage that afternoon. Claiming your child's graduation was ruined by another graduate's unexpected moment is like claiming your wedding was ruined because another guest cried too loudly. The license is signed. Your moment was always yours. So was his. 60, the student scheduled to speak at graduation, had written a speech that included references to his own experience with depression during high school and a brief acknowledgement of a classmate who had died by suicide during their sophomore year. A Karen on the speech review committee redlined both sections, calling the content too heavy for a graduation audience, and pushed for their removal before the student ever approached a microphone. Censoring a student's authentic personal narrative in a graduation speech, specifically because it addresses mental health, is legally precarious, educationally counterproductive, and actively harmful to the students in the audience who share that experience and came to the ceremony carrying it with them. Student speech at graduation is protected under First Amendment principles in public schools. Viewpoint-based censorship, including the suppression of mental health narratives, has been consistently found constitutionally problematic in federal courts reviewing school speech cases involving student personal addresses. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and the American Association of Suicidology have both published guidance specifically supporting the responsible, thoughtful acknowledgement of suicide loss in school community settings, including graduation, as part of grief processing, not as a risk factor to be managed away by a committee. Research on adolescent mental health and school connectedness shows that public acknowledgement of shared mental health struggles by a peer leader in an appropriate context reduces stigma and increases help-seeking behavior among students in the audience who needed to hear that they were not alone. The graduating class that has experienced a peer's suicide does not become less affected by that loss because it is not mentioned at graduation. Silence at a ceremony is not healing, it is erasure, and the families of lost students who attend graduation specifically to witness that acknowledgement know the difference. Cutting mental health from a graduation speech because graduation should be happy is like editing grief out of a eulogy because funerals should celebrate life. The room already knows what happened. Let them say it out loud. 61, the graduation ceremony had featured recognition for a cultural student group's traditional performance, and a Karen filed a formal complaint insisting that the school was obligated to either provide equal stage time for every cultural group represented in the graduating class or remove all cultural programming entirely in the name of fairness to everyone. Cultural performances at graduation reflect student groups who organized, prepared, rehearsed, and offered to contribute to the ceremony. The programming reflects student initiative and what was actually brought to the planning table, not a school editorial decision about which cultures to feature and which to omit. Anti-discrimination law prohibits excluding groups from participation based on protected characteristics. It does not create a proactive mandate requiring schools to produce equal cultural programming for every demographic group, regardless of whether any student group from that background organized a contribution and submitted it through the process. The include everyone equally or include no one. Binary is a documented rhetorical pattern that uses the language of fairness to achieve the removal of representation for groups that did organize and contribute. An outcome that creates less meaning for every student in the building and honors no one's equity interests. Schools cannot feature cultural performances that were not organized and offered by student groups. The absence of a particular group's cultural expression reflects a gap in what was organized, not a discriminatory editorial choice that the school made against that community. Research shows that cultural programming at graduation increases ceremony meaning and family engagement for students and families whose identity is reflected. Removing it to achieve surface-level uniformity reduces the ceremony's meaning for everyone without producing genuine equity for anyone. The appropriate response to this feeling is to organize, prepare, and offer something for next year's class through the same process every other group used. Demanding all cultural performances be removed because yours wasn't included is like demanding all flowers be pulled from a garden because yours wasn't planted yet. 62. She was tapping a volunteer on the arm near the stage entrance, correcting a graduate's mortarboard angle before he walked. Physically adjusting the cap because the tilt was wrong, the placement was off, and it was, in her assessment, disrespectful to the ceremony. There is no standardized federal, state, or school-level policy governing the precise angle at which a graduation cap must be worn. Cap placement is a personal aesthetic choice with no bearing on ceremony legitimacy, diploma validity, or any other outcome that matters. Mortarboard placement norms vary by institution, culture, region, and decade. Photographs of graduation ceremonies from every era of American education show a wide variety of cap angles, tilt degrees, and placement styles with no historical uniformity that would justify treating one angle as correct and another as a violation. The mortarboard, which originated from clerical academic dress in medieval Europe, has never been the subject of a standardized angle requirement in any American educational governance document, including those of the National Association of Secondary School Principals or any state education department that has ever existed. Physically touching a graduate's body or clothing without consent, even to fix something, constitutes unwanted physical contact that would be categorized as a boundary violation in any professional behavioral guidelines context, regardless of how well-intentioned the touch was meant to be. The Karen's self-appointed role as cap angle enforcement officer carries no institutional backing, no venue authority, and no administrative standing. She is, by every applicable measure, a stranger adjusting another person's hat without permission on one of the most significant days of that person's life. Graduate satisfaction surveys have never included a category for cap placement uniformity because no graduate has ever cited it as a meaningful component of their ceremony experience. Adjusting someone's graduation cap angle because it's tilted is like straightening a stranger's collar before a job interview they didn't ask you to attend. The hat angle was never the thing. 63, a student who had completed all graduation requirements in December, a full semester ahead of schedule, was choosing to participate in the June ceremony with her class. Her mother submitted a request to the school demanding her daughter be listed first in the graduation program, arguing that she technically graduated first, that the alphabetical listing was factually incorrect, and that the school owed her daughter the recognition of that timeline. Graduation programs list participants in the ceremony, not in chronological order of requirement completion, and the organizational logic of a graduation program is alphabetical convenience, not academic timeline accuracy or a rank ordering of who finished what when. Early graduation is an academic administrative status, not a ceremony seniority designation, and students who complete requirements early and choose to walk with their cohort in June do so on equal ceremonial footing with every other student crossing that stage that day. The claim that alphabetical listing is factually wrong misunderstands what the program actually represents. It is a ceremony participant list, not an academic transcript, and its order reflects logistical convention rather than chronological truth about when any individual student's final credit was recorded. Students who complete requirements early frequently have the option of walking at an earlier ceremony. When they choose to wait and walk with their cohort instead, they are accepting the logistical conventions of that ceremony, including being listed wherever their surname falls alphabetically. Implementing their request consistently would require schools to track and rank the exact completion date of every graduate's final credit. A logistical exercise with no educational or ceremonial value that would produce a program no general audience could interpret meaningfully. Demanding to be listed first because your daughter finished her credits in December is like demanding the first seat on a plane because you bought your ticket before everyone else on board. The boarding happened today. The list is alphabetical. 64, she had been watching the ceremony for 40 minutes when the principal used the phrase, "I now confer upon you the rights and responsibilities of graduation," rather than the specific formulation she had apparently expected. "I now declare you officially graduated." And she filed a written complaint afterward, arguing that the incorrect phrasing had rendered the ceremony incomplete and legally invalid. The specific verbal formula used at a graduation ceremony has no legal bearing on the validity of the diplomas conferred during it. The ceremony is symbolic, the legal conferral is administrative, and the principal is not a judge, administering an oath with binding legal language requirements. Diplomas in American public schools are legally valid documents determined by the completion of academic requirements and authorized by the school board. Their validity is established through administrative records, not through ceremonial speech acts performed on a stage in front of an audience. Commencement ceremonies are public celebrations, not legal proceedings. The language used by a principal, superintendent, or MC at a graduation has no legal force and is not subject to any standardized script required by any law in any jurisdiction. University commencement ceremonies across the country use dozens of different formulations for the declaration moment, from formal Latin phrases to casual contemporary language, and all of them are equally valid because none of them are the legal mechanism of degree conferral in the first place. The administrative records of graduation, the signed diploma, the updated transcript, the district's graduation roster, constitute the legal evidence of completion, all of which exist entirely independently of what phrasing the principal chose to use when standing at the podium. A Karen who raises this objection has raised it after the fact, by which point every diploma has been prepared, the ceremony is complete, and the records are final regardless of her preferred wording. Insisting graduation is invalid because the principal used different words is like insisting a touchdown doesn't count because the announcer said score. The ball crossed the line, the diploma was signed. 65, she had been posting in the class parent group for weeks about the graduation gift fund. The amount she had decided was appropriate, the deadline she had set, and, eventually, the names of families who had not contributed. Not directly. Just specifically enough that everyone in the thread understood exactly who she meant. Parent-organized class gift collections for graduation are entirely voluntary, entirely informal, and legally unaffiliated with the school in any way that would give any parent enforcement authority over any other parent's financial decisions. Class gift collections are not school-sponsored activities in the vast majority of American school districts. They are informal parent initiatives with no institutional backing, no legal standing, and no mechanism and stem for enforcement that any institution would recognize or support. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act and related state laws prohibit schools from facilitating or endorsing financial solicitations directed at families without explicit district approval, meaning the school cannot and does not sanction the pressure campaign being run in a group chat by a parent who decided to treat a suggestion as a mandate. Publicly identifying families who decline to participate in a voluntary financial collection creates a hostile social environment. School counselors and administrators categorize this behavior as social coercion and have intervened in documented cases where the pressure escalated beyond the group chat. The income diversity within any typical graduating class means that a fixed contribution amount is inherently inequitable. Families facing economic hardship are disproportionately harmed by a social pressure campaign tied to a specific dollar figure set by someone with no visibility into their circumstances. Gift collection for school communities is a voluntary cultural practice whose value depends entirely on its being genuinely voluntary. The moment enforcement pressure is applied, the practice becomes coercive regardless of how charitable the original intent was. Publicly shaming families who skip the class gift fund is like the neighborhood watch chair finding people who don't bring a dish to the optional potluck. The event is voluntary, your spreadsheet is not a law. 66, a microphone cut out twice during the ceremony. Names in the back half of the room were occasionally difficult to hear through the audio system. The principal was standing near the stage exit after graduation ended when the Karen found her, and what followed was a formal confrontation. a demand for accountability, a claim of negligence, and the assertion that this was unacceptable and that the principal had clearly not prepared. Audio system performance at large events is a technical matter managed by AV professionals, venue operators, and equipment variables that no school principal controls or is personally responsible for managing in real time from the stage. Audio system setup for graduation ceremonies is managed by venue AV staff, contracted audio technicians, or school technology personnel, not by the principal, who is coordinating graduates, managing ceremony flow, and handling the dozen other logistical responsibilities that fall on her during the event itself. Live event audio systems in large venues have documented technical variability caused by crowd noise, humidity, temperature changes, wireless frequency interference, and equipment performance. These are known variables in professional event production, not evidence of individual negligence by any administrator. The principal's role in ceremony planning involves confirming that AV services are contracted, that technical staff are present, and that contingency protocols exist. Once those conditions are met, the principal's technical responsibility is discharged, and what happens with the equipment is the AV team's domain. Documentation from professional event management shows that temporary microphone issues occur in a significant majority of large, live events, regardless of venue quality or preparation level. They are industry standard occurrences that audiences accept as part of live production. The demand for personal accountability from the principal for an audio glitch reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of what the principal manages on graduation day. Blaming the principal for a microphone glitch is like blaming the conductor because a string broke mid-concert. They organized the whole performance. They didn't manufacture the equipment. 67, the ceremonies were done. The Karen had by this point submitted 4 formal complaints, sent 2 tagged social media posts to the school district's accounts, called the local newspaper, and submitted a formal demand for a school board meeting to review what she described as a pattern of failures. She described this to other parents as being passionate, involved, doing what any dedicated parent would do for their child. Complaint volume is not a measure of parental investment. It is a measure of sustained dissatisfaction, and there is a documented and significant difference between advocating for your child's genuine needs and conducting a multi-platform disruption campaign against a community event that affected hundreds of other families who had a graduation that day too. Parental involvement research consistently identifies effective advocacy as targeted, specific, and proportionate. Parents who engage productively with schools on issues affecting their children's actual educational experience are documented as positive contributors to school community health and administrator retention. The behaviors described, multi-channel complaint campaigns, media tagging, simultaneous submissions to multiple oversight bodies, are documented in school administration literature as adversarial parent engagement, a pattern associated with increased administrator burnout, staff turnover, and deteriorating home-school relationships that take years to repair. Genuine parental investment in graduation looks like volunteering for ceremony coordination, supporting student speech preparation, showing up early to help, and attending the event as a celebrant rather than an auditor cataloging material for a complaint portfolio. The reframing of disruptive complaint behavior as dedication is a rationalization pattern in which the social cost of the behavior is obscured by attaching it to a valued identity, dedicated parent, rather than examining what the behavior actually produced for the graduate at the center of it. The graduates whose ceremony was the subject of all of this had one graduation. They deserved for the primary parental narrative of that day to be celebration, not grievance. 68, she caught the vice principal in the hallway before the ceremony and raised a formal objection. The planned 30-second moment of silence for classmates who had died during the high school years was morbid, inappropriate, and not what graduation was supposed to be about, and she wanted it removed from the program. Moments of silence at graduation for deceased classmates are among the most emotionally significant, carefully administered, and broadly supported elements of a graduation ceremony. And objecting to grief acknowledgement in front of the grieving families who came specifically for those 30 seconds is the most socially damaging move available to any person in that building. The practice of acknowledging deceased classmates at graduation is a documented tradition in American schools dating back at least to the early 20th century, and is considered a core component of class identity and community grief processing by school counselors who work with students through loss. The American School Counselor Association explicitly recommends that schools include structured acknowledgement of deceased students in major milestone ceremonies, noting that unacknowledged grief in a celebratory context can be re-traumatizing for surviving peers and family members who needed that moment to be honored. Families of deceased classmates who attend graduation, some of whom travel specifically to be there, describe the moment of silence as one of the most healing and meaningful aspects of the entire event. A 30-second acknowledgement that their child was real was part of this class and is not forgotten. The objection that grief acknowledgement is morbid reflects a cultural discomfort with death that psychologists describe as normative but clinically unhealthy, and it carries no weight against the documented needs of the grieving families sitting in that room. Schools that eliminated moments of silence in response to similar complaints reinstated the practice within one graduation cycle after the backlash. Objecting to a 30-second silence for deceased classmates because graduation should be positive is like objecting to a 21-gun salute because the guns make noise. The silence is the whole point. 69, she had strong feelings about the graduation program's paper stock, the recessional music, the seating arrangement, the cap decoration on one student she didn't know, and the phrasing used by the principal at the end of the ceremony. She also had strong feelings about the fact that a student she had never met had an emotional moment on stage that she considered a distraction, and about the fact that the ceremony had started 11 minutes late. And about all of it. 71 items, 71 complaints, each one real, each one aimed at a day that belonged to someone else's graduating class, someone else's child, someone else's 12 years of effort, finally arriving at a single morning in June. Here's the thing about all of it that the Karen never quite grasps. Graduation is a community ceremony, which means it was built to hold everyone simultaneously, including the crying mother, the decorated cap, the student who danced across the stage, the interpreter near the left side of the room, the translated column in the program, and the 30 seconds of silence for the kids who didn't make it. It was built to hold the student who finished credits in July and the one who finished in December, the one who spoke about her faith and the one who made the room laugh, the family that arrived early and the one that arrived late, the graduate who needed an accommodation and the one who walked straight across without stopping. Every single complaint in this video tried to shrink that ceremony down to one person's preferred version of it. None of them succeeded because the ceremony was bigger than the complaint every single time. That is what graduation is. It was always going to be bigger than the Karen standing in the lobby with a list. 70, she filed a formal complaint because the graduation program listed a student under a preferred name rather than a legal name, and she wanted the district to reprint every copy and replace them in the hands of every attendee before anyone left the venue, as though that were a logistically coherent request on a day when the parking lot had not yet emptied. Preferred name policies in American K-12 education have expanded significantly since the mid-2010s, with a majority of large urban and suburban school districts adopting formal procedures allowing students to use names other than their legal names on non-legal school materials. And the graduation program is universally classified as a ceremonial, non-legal document by school legal counsel with no bearing on diploma validity or any official record. The National Education Association and the American School Counselor Association have both published guidelines encouraging schools to use students' preferred names in all non-legal contexts, citing research linking name recognition to student belonging and psychological safety during exactly the kind of milestone moment that graduation represents. Reprinting a graduation program for a school of 300 or more students costs thousands of dollars and requires days of production time, a cost borne by general school funds, meaning by every family in the district, in response to a single complaint about a name on a ceremonial pamphlet. The legal name change process is entirely separate from anything a graduation program does or does not include. A graduation program has never been a mechanism for or against legal name recognition in any jurisdiction, and multiple court cases have clarified that schools are not required to use only legal names on ceremonial materials. Demanding a graduation program be reprinted because a student goes by a name you didn't expect is like demanding a birthday cake be remade because it says the name the person actually uses. The diploma is still signed. The graduate still walked. The cake is still for them. 71 by the end of it all. The complaint emails, the board meeting demands, the social media posts, the confrontations in hallways before the procession started, the objections to paper stock and recessional music and sign language interpreters and 30-second silences and preferred names and cap angles and seating arrangements and the specific phrasing used by a principal at a podium. The sum total of every Karen complaint in this video produced exactly the same outcome. The ceremony happened. The graduates walked. The names were called. The diplomas were handed over or mailed home or awarded under a different sun at a different time for the students who needed a different path to the same finish line. None of the complaints stopped the ceremony. None of them changed the fact that those students earned what they went up there to receive. And not one graduate in the years that follow will look back on their graduation and think about the paperweight of the program. They will remember who cried in the audience. They will remember what the speaker said that made everyone laugh. They will remember the 30 seconds of silence and who it was for. They will remember the name being called and what it felt like when it was theirs. That is what survived every single complaint on this list. The ceremony was always going to be bigger than whoever was trying to make it smaller. So here's your final question. Not about the Karen, but about you. Which one of these 71 complaints did you witness? Which one happened at your graduation? Drop the number in the comments because the most unhinged ones are always the ones nobody planned for, and we want to hear every single one. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.